Chapter 1729. Yang Tao was not a simple-minded person. He couldn't help but exclaim, "I heard that the daughter of the Feng family is the only legitimate wife of the Feng family in this generation. She's the real deal. If it were 10 or 20 years ago, she would have been the mother of the world." She really didn't know what kind of great luck Feng Longzi had to be able to enter the eyes of the Feng clan. "I heard that Feng Jin is a very upright person. How could he tolerate Feng Zhen? He only had one precious son. Of course, he wanted to give him the best." Yang Tao's eyes turned red at the thought of his son marrying and having children. He stared at the daughters of other families. Which girl would become his son's wife in the future? At the thought of his son marrying and having children, the word betrothal gift popped up in Yang Tao's head. Marrying a wife was expensive. Not only did she need power and wealth, but she also needed money. As a father, he had to earn enough for his son. Mother of the world? Wang Lin couldn't help but sneer. How could the Feng family be interested in a so-called empress? Back then, the emperor of Dongqing had traded the position of Zhao Yi for a concubine's daughter. Changsheng was the daughter of the legitimate wife, and she was the honorable eldest daughter of the legitimate wife. How could the empress of Dongqing's level enter her eyes? It was clear that Feng Zhen had hit the jackpot. Yang Tao didn't understand. Neither did Wang Lin. How did Feng Zhen and Feng Jin become in-laws? Apart from their brains, their personalities and backgrounds were completely different. Feng Jin was from a noble family. How could he be willing to marry his precious daughter to a family like Feng Zhen? Did he get kicked in the head by a donkey? Or maybe Jiang Pengji was the middleman? Yang Tao didn't hide his envy. Sigh. Feng Longzi will be a grandfather in 5 or 6 years. I don't even know where my future daughter-in-law is. He heard that Feng Yi and Changxing were childhood friends. They had been close since they were young. They had nurtured each other well. Childhood sweethearts, the two of them were innocent. It sounded so beautiful. From the time they were young to the time they spent together, experiencing it once would not be a waste of their lives. Wang Lin rolled his eyes at his friend and said gently, "Didn't you get engaged to Yang Xi's daughter for your nephew?" Yang Tao was stunned. He asked, "Yang Xi's daughter? When did that happen? Why didn't he remember?" Wang Lin sighed and reminded Yang Tao. At the same time, he felt sorry for his nephew. With a father with such a bad memory, a good marriage was almost ruined. Previously, when Yang Xi, as an emissary, was discussing the matter of allegiance with Yang Tao and the others, the two of them had joked about the two families becoming in-laws. Of course, Yang Xi was reluctant, and Yang Tao didn't take it seriously either. It was all thanks to Wang Lin's jesting, which put Yang Xi in a dilemma. In the end, he vaguely agreed to this childish betrothal. Yang Xi felt that this was a joke, and he would forget it after a long time. Unfortunately, Wang Lin had a good memory. After his reminder, Yang Tao recalled that there was indeed such a thing. Isn't that just a joke? Yang Tao scratched his head. He did not take this child's marriage seriously. Wang Lin said, "But aren't you worried about your nephew's marriage? Among the sons of the civil and military families under Lu Gong's banner, there are more men than women. It is not easy for you to find a man of the same age for your eldest nephew who is also of the same social status. Or could it be that Zhengzi dislikes Yang Xi for being of low birth and not being a good match?" Marriage was not only a matter of two children, but also a matter of two families. If Yang Tao had such a grudge against Yang Xi, Wang Lin would not continue to pay attention to Yang Xi's children. If he was not careful, he would become enemies. Strangely enough, the civil and military officials under Jiang Pengji's command had more daughters in the early years. Most of the second and third births were sons. That was why there were more men than women in the same generation as Yang Tao's sons. If Yang Tao wanted to find an in-law among them, the earlier he did it, the better. If he was late, he could only pick up the leftovers. Why would I? It's just that the children are still young. Will they blame me when they grow up? Wang Lin was speechless. Yang Tao was the one who wanted a child's marriage, and now he was the one who said that an arranged marriage was not a good idea. It was getting harder and harder to please. Yang Tao could read the disdain on his friend's face. He could not help but smile and try to fool him. Although he said that, Yang Tao still seriously considered Yang Xi's daughter. The more he thought about it, the more he was tempted. Yang Tao was a man of action. He felt that Yang Xi's daughter was indeed a good choice, so he was going to beat around the bush. He thought that his question was very vague, but in front of Yang Xi, it was as clear as day. Yang Xi avoided Yang Tao for a few days. When he could not avoid him anymore, he pretended to be deaf and dumb and pretended that he did not understand. If Jiang Nongqi knew that he had accidentally betrothed his daughter to someone else, wouldn't she beat him to death? Jiang Pengji heard the commotion between the two of them. She asked casually. Yang Xi was a civil official while Yang Tao was a military general. The latter's identity was also very sensitive. Even the slightest disturbance could not be treated as an ordinary matter. If the two of them had a disagreement, it would be difficult to deal with. Yang Xi was brought to Jiang Pengji for questioning. He could only smile bitterly and tell her what had happened. Jiang Pengji could not help but laugh. Are you saying that you decided on your daughter's marriage without Nongqin's consent? Yang Xi defended himself. Wasn't that a joke? Who knew that Yang Jingze would take it seriously? Jiang Pengji said, children's marriage should be based on the child's wishes. It's useless for you two rough men to be anxious at the side. Yang Xi said, Xi thinks so too, but the child is still so young. I really don't know why Yang Jingze is so anxious. Jiang Pengji thought of Feng Jin, who had been walking with the wind recently. She could not help but laugh. It's probably because he's been agitated. In terms of age, Feng Jin was not the oldest among them, but who asked him to get married early and have children early? Feng Yi was sensible and intelligent. The marriage that she had decided on was the best. She took away the most beautiful cabbage from Feng Jin's family. No wonder Feng Jin was so smug. It made those who had sons at home anxious. But then again, on the surface, Yang Tao is an excellent candidate for in-laws. Yang Xi said, that's true, but we still have to inform Nongqin. A daughter's household registration followed her mother's. As a biological father, Yang Xi really did not have the right to take charge of his daughter's marriage. Speaking of this, he was very sad. Fu Wang could still coax and pester Hui Jun to relent. If Yang Xi and Feng Jin had not pushed Fu Wang to the position of commander-in-chief, he would have married a beautiful woman a long time ago. Yang Xi was miserable. Jiang Nongqin was unmoved by force or persuasion. So far, she had no intention of giving Yang Xi a status. Yang Xi always had the illusion that he was Jiang Nongqin's mistress. When she had needs, she would come and sleep with him. When she pulled up her pants, she would not recognize him. Thinking of this, Yang Xi looked at his lord with deep resentment in his eyes. When does my lord plan to have a young lord? Chapter 1730. Jiang Pengji smiled and said, Why are you suddenly asking about this? Yang Xi begged in a low voice, Please put it on the agenda as soon as possible. You look forward to the young lord so much? Yang Xi deliberated and said, The matter of children is my lord's family matter. As an official, it's inconvenient for me to say too much. Jiang Pengji could not help but roll her eyes at Yang Xi. Why was he so nosy when he knew it was her family matter? Yang Xi changed the topic. It's just that. Nongqin is always thinking about you, my lord. She bluntly said that you haven't got a family yet. How can she be one step ahead of you? Jiang Pengji was speechless. In that case, Yang Xi's singleness was her fault? Yang Xi was speechless. Didn't his lord have any idea who the culprit was? Fortunately, the other party was a woman. If it was a man, Yang Xi really doubted whether his group of officials would be able to get out of singleness. Would their brains be green after getting out of singleness? His lord's charm was too great. She was attractive to both men and women. Yang Xi was so jealous that his eyes turned red. Others hastened their marriage for the young lord, but he hastened it for the sake of getting out of singleness. Cough cough. We'll talk about this another day. Yang Xi's eyes were filled with hidden bitterness. They were all adults. The phrase, we'll talk about it another day, was meaningful. Yang Xi knew that there would be no result for the time being. He could only give up and choose to save the country indirectly from Wei Ci. However, Wei Ci was also a slippery old fox. A cunning rabbit has 3 burrows. How could it be so easy to catch him? On the other hand, Jiang Nongqin received the news that Yang Si had arranged a child marriage for her daughter. When she saw the letter, she raised her eyebrows and pursed her lips into a line. She seemed to be suppressing her anger. Right now, she really wanted to cut Yang Si into 8 pieces. If not for the fact that she could not leave, she might have killed her way over alone. Yang Tao. After her anger subsided, Jiang Nongqin also seriously thought about the contents of the letter. In all fairness, Yang Si had a good eye for people. Yang Tao was once a feudal lord. His ancestors had a strong foundation. According to the current standards, this child marriage was still a girl who was out of her league. In this era, people did not pay much attention to free love. Arranged marriages were the mainstream. At the same time, they also paid attention to matching families. Family background was an important criterion for marriage. Yang Tao's son was still young and his aptitude could not be seen. However, just by looking at his parents, Yang Tao and Yan Shushuan's father's generation were dragons and phoenixes among men. No matter how bad their children were, they could not be that bad. On the other hand, his daughter's family background was indeed much weaker. In the future, it would be difficult for her to find such a good partner. Oh Yang. Just as Jiang Nongqin stuffed the letter into her pocket, she heard her daughter's childish voice calling out to her. She got up and walked out of the study. Looking for the source of the sound, she saw that at the end of the corridor, her 3-headed daughter was twisting her way towards her. Her sparse and soft short hair was tied into 3 bundles, making her pink round face look even more comical and adorable. Behind the daughter was a personal maid and wet nurse. The 2 of them looked as if they wanted to support the daughter but didn't dare to. They stretched out their hands at any time, ready to catch this precious baby. The coldness on Jiang Nongqin's face melted instantly, as if it had met the warm sun. Oh Yang. With a childish voice, little dumpling struggled to walk to her feet, opened her arms, and hugged her legs. This was still too long for her. In addition to the cold wind blowing outside, her chubby cheeks blushed. Jiang Nongqin held the little girl up and could clearly smell the milk fragrance on her. Oh Yang. Seeing that her mother ignored her, Tuanzi persistently shouted, trying to get a response. Probably because she was born in a family of generals, the child was stronger than her peers since she was born. She also learned to walk faster than her peers. Now, she could walk steadily and speak early. Although she couldn't speak clearly, she was a chatterbox. She would shout whenever she caught someone, and she could talk for a long time. As for this, she probably took after her father. Jiang Nongqin casually weighed the child in her hand. The heavy weight made her feel better. The wet nurse was worried. Madam, the eldest lady insisted on coming out. We couldn't stop her. Jiang Nongqin was very open-minded. Children from a family of generals were thick-skinned and didn't need to be so meticulous. It's cold now, so she needs to wear more clothes. If she wants to go out, let her walk around. Remember to keep warm and away from dangerous places. The wet nurses were really meticulous. The child was covered in layers of clothes, so she wasn't afraid of the cold at all. Oh Yang. Tuanzi put her hands on both sides of Jiang Nongqin's cheeks discontentedly, as if she wanted to turn her face to herself. She was calling for her mother. How could her mother ignore her? Jiang Nongqin smiled and said, I'm here. You have such a bad temper. What should you do in the future? She patted her daughter's plump butt and took her into the house with a smile. Tuanzi looked around curiously. As soon as Jiang Nongqin put her down, she ran around with her little legs. Come here, come to me. Tuanzi was very obedient, but she ran too far away from Jiang Nongqin. It took some time to run there, so she simply rolled over. She was dressed so thickly that she looked like a dumpling. She didn't stop until she rolled to Jiang Nongqin's feet, giggling. Your father has found a marriage for you. Tuanzi tilted her head and repeated blankly, Father? Jiang Nongqin said, Yes, it's your unreliable father who arranged a marriage for you without permission. Tuanzi didn't understand. She couldn't help laughing when she heard the word father. She looked around as if she was looking for someone. Jiang Nongqin asked her, "Are you satisfied with this marriage?" Tuanzi didn't know how to look up at her. Most men in the world are the same. It all depends on how they are raised. Jiang Nongqin fiddled with the hair on her daughter's head and muttered to herself, "I heard that Yang Tao is a rare handsome man. I don't know how his wife looks, but her surname is Yen and she's Yen Lin's younger sister. She's pretty too. The son of these two must be good-looking. He's well-educated. He's not bad," her mother was talking to herself. Tuanzi sat on the mat and lowered her head to play with the accessories on her mother's waist. When the other party wasn't paying attention, she got close to her head and stuck out her tongue to lick it. Poof! Tuanzi stuck out her tongue and her little face was full of disgust. When she was disgusted, her mother hooked her finger and gently scratched her soft chin. Instead of choosing an unknown person, it's better to raise a person who knows everything about him. What do you think? After the anger subsided, Jiang Nongqin made a lot of plans. The more she thought about it, the more she felt it was a good marriage. Most of the time, it would be a blind marriage. The situation of the husband's family depended on the investigation and the mouth of the matchmaker. Instead of that, it would be better to pick one from the younger generation and know everything about him. Jiang Nongqin made the decision and immediately wrote a reply to Yang Si. Yang Si read the letter and had mixed feelings. Chapter 1731. Naturally, Yang Si could not hide these things from Jiang. After all, Jiang Nongqin was her #1 fan and she had almost no secrets. Yang Si had just received a letter from his family. Ji Ho Jiao also received a greeting letter from her #1 hardcore fan. This letter was twice as thick as Yang Si's. It was very thick and heavy. Jiang Nongqin also roughly explained her little plan and vaguely asked for his opinion. No matter what Yang Tao's current status was, he was still a former feudal lord. It was one thing for him to marry an ordinary landowning household, but it just had to be Jiang Yu. Ji Yunshu had 2 important civil and military subordinates. In a way, there was a political element to this marriage. If they wanted to get married, they would have to ask for their lord's opinion. The lord made the decision and nodded. Only then could this child marriage be considered a clear path. Ginger? Ji grabbed Yang Si and smiled. In this world, I'm afraid only you and your wife would dare to raise Jingzi's son as a child son-in-law. When Yang Si heard the word husband and wife, his eyes lit up. He was obviously very happy, but he still pretended to be reserved. Since ancient times, there have only been child brides. How could there be a child son-in-law? Yang Si said, "If General Yang hears this, I'm afraid that not only will the marriage not succeed, but he will also become enemies. But, if I think about it carefully, this is indeed a good marriage. In the end, it's still his loss." How could there be a loss in this matter? Ginger? Jiunshu said with a smile, "How can you and Nongqin be worse than Yang Jingzi? In my opinion, he's the one who got the better end of the stick." According to the perspective of this era, this marriage was indeed for Yang Si's side. If one were to analyze it in detail, the result would be hard to say. Yang Tao's advantages were obvious, but so were his flaws. The biggest flaw was his identity. Even if it was Ginger? Ji Yunshu did not mind the past and placed him in an important position. The others would also be on guard against Yang Tao and secretly suppress him, and Yang Tao would also restrain himself. He could control the military, but he could not become the #1 person in the army. There was bound to be an even more powerful general above him. For example, in the general ranking in his previous life, Yang Tao was very popular among the landowning households. However, the results left everyone dumbfounded. Yang Tao was ranked 5th. The first was Fu Wang, who came from a humble background and had a bad reputation. This result not only made many of the courtiers heave a sigh of relief, but it also made Yang Tao and his companions heave a sigh of relief. Even if one wanted to be in the limelight, one had to look at the right time and the right place. Not only would there be no benefits in being in the limelight, but it would also bring about a fatal disaster. Being ranked 5th on the general leaderboard wasn't bad either. It wasn't eye-catching, his safety was guaranteed, and he even had a consolation prize to make up for it. The situation in this life was similar. Ginger? Ji Yunshu didn't mind, but Yang Tao couldn't ignore it. If Yang Tao was said to be a partial student, then Jiang Nongqin and Yang Si had a balanced development. Yang Si was ginger? Ji Ye's trusted advisor would have a high status in the future. At the very least, he would be able to obtain a noble title. As for Jiang Nongqin, needless to say, the reason why the women's battalion could have its current scale and influence was inseparable from her painstaking management. As the leader of the female soldiers in terms of military power and influence, she was second only to Fu Wang, the commander-in-chief, and suppressed the other generals. Not only could she do whatever she wanted at the front line, but she was also the head of logistics. The casualty camp was her territory. The network she had accumulated was not a joke. Over the years, there were at least 200,000 female soldiers who had enlisted or retired. Among these 200,000 female soldiers, the first in their minds was their lord, Jiang Nongqin. Ji was ranked second, and the first in command, General Jiang Nongqin. This couple had a combination of civil and military skills. How could their political influence be as simple as 1 + 1? As for the issue of their background, both Yang Si and Jiang Nongqin came from humble backgrounds. They were indeed incomparable to Yang Tao's aristocratic family background. However, as long as it was given to Jiang, Ji had enough time. She would completely reverse the values of this era that judged a person's value by bloodline and family background. At that time, Yang Tao, who had lost the halo of his family background, would meet this couple. The two families would be in-laws. It was still unknown who would be the one to whom. Yang Si smiled and said, "Of course, General Jiang and I are not inferior." Jiang? Ji casually flipped through the documents on the table and pretended to ask inadvertently, "What's Xing's attitude on this child marriage?" Yang Si thought carefully and sighed. General Yang doesn't have any special thoughts. He's just envious of Zishir's marriage to Huayu's family. In a moment of impulse, he decided on this marriage. As for Yan Xiaoyang, I'm afraid he has a lot of twists and turns. Jiang? Ji could not help but tease. You and Xiaoyang, the two of you are thinking too much. Yang Si's expression was a little unnatural. This was an occupational hazard. They were subconsciously thinking of conspiracy theories. They could not be blamed. Jiang? Ji said, Zhengze is simple, but Xiaoyang is not easy to deal with. He has a lot of thoughts. It's called 9 twists and 18 turns. He did not object to this matter and even tried his best to facilitate it. In the end, it's mostly because of Jiang Nongqin's influence in the military camp and here. She summed it up in one sentence. I guess only Jiang Nongqin and Zhengze regard this child marriage as a child marriage. If the two families got married, as long as Yang Tao did not court death, he would basically have the golden token of immunity. If Yang Tao and Jiang Nongqin became in-laws, she would be more at ease. Ji made her stand clear, which made her feel more at ease. This was the core meaning of this political child marriage. It was a pity that Yang Si and Yan Lin thought so much that they became bald. However, Yang Tao and Jiang Nongqin were straightforward. The former was happy that he had a daughter-in-law. His son did not have to worry about his marriage when he grew up. The latter was satisfied that her daughter had a child son-in-law. In the future, they could play the game of raising childhood sweethearts. They could raise the child's son-in-law according to the type of husband they liked. Poor Daoist sees your chrysanthemum is poisonous. Only Rong and Xiaoyang are seriously fighting with their wits. Their teammates are all idle. Moon Shadow Wander. I also want a partner who can let me win by doing nothing. Since the Lord has no opinion, then this marriage is set. In my opinion, the most important thing is for the children to be in love with each other. Otherwise, they will become bitter couples in the future. Yang Si looked at his lord with a strange look, as if he was very surprised that she also had such a sentimental and naive side. Nowadays, blind and mute marriages are common. It is extremely rare to know a husband or a bride before marriage. If the children grow up together, they will be more affectionate when they are young. Compared to ordinary couples, their relationship will be deeper. No matter what, they won't become bitter couples, right? Yang Si and Jiang? Ji's thinking was not in the same dimension. Jiang? Ji complained, "In the future, the atmosphere will become more and more open-minded. Your way of thinking may become outdated in 20 or 30 years." Xianxia said, "The most important thing is to be in line with the times." Advanced ideas were destined to not work in an inappropriate context. No matter what would happen in the future, there was nothing wrong with Xia's current way of thinking. "Where is Zisher?" Xianxia said, "Lord, have you forgotten? Didn't you agree to his request and transfer him back to Wanzhou?" "Jiang?" Ji's hand paused. She did not know whether to laugh or cry. "I just agreed yesterday, and he can't wait to escape today? He could escape today, but he could not escape tomorrow." Chapter 1732. A Letter from the Lord? When Jiang Pingji's letter arrived, Sun Wen was sitting with Qiguan Rang. Because of their positions, the two of them had established a solid revolutionary friendship over the past 2 years. While thinking of ways to sabotage Zhongzhao and provoking them to fight and kill each other, they drank tea, played chess, and chatted. Their days were wonderful. Sun Wen and Qiguan Rang had become close friends who talked about everything. Qiguan Rang tore open the envelope and read the letter carefully. His usually cold face had a hint of a smile. It's still good news?" Qiguan Rang handed the letter to Sun Wen. At the same time, he lifted the hem of his clothes and sat down on the mat. He sighed and said, "Since the Lord has spoken, those who like to fight should stop for a while. Isn't it good to train the troops every day? All they think about is fighting and killing." A strange look flashed in Sun Wen's eyes. Fighting and killing? It was rare to hear such words from Qiguan Rang. It made Qiguan Rang sound like a peace ambassador. In fact, he was the best at stirring up trouble. Sun Wen finished reading the letter with a smile. He folded the letter back and carefully put it aside. Aren't young people full of energy? They like to fight and are eager to achieve success. We all know that, Sun Wen said leisurely. But now is not the right time. It's really not good to start fighting. The army is stationed at Zhanjiang Pass. Occasionally, we can send troops to Zhongzhou for a fight, but we can't really start fighting. Beiyuan and Xichang are also eyeing the meat of Zhongzhou. Whoever moves first will become the target of public criticism. Since the Lord has spoken to rest and recuperate, they will understand. Sun Wen and the others were really annoyed by the generals. Communication failed, so they asked Jiang Pingji to make a decision. The two old foxes knew what the outcome would be. They were not surprised by Jiang Pingji's reply. What outcome would be considered an accident? Their lord was like those who were eager to make contributions. When she saw a good opportunity, she wanted to send troops. Reality had proven that their lord was not that kind of person. Her strategy was not inferior to that of the top strategists. With Jiang Pingji's reply, those who were like a stimulant could go to bed and use their extra energy to train the troops. Qiguan Rang's brows relaxed. He said sincerely, "I can finally relax for a while." Sun Wen nodded, and the two continued to brew tea and chat. Compared to Xianxia and the others suffering in Nanxing, Qiguan Rang and Sun Wen's days in Zhanjiang Pass were much better. Most of the chores were handed over to the younger students or the newly promoted newcomers. They only needed to control the general direction. The training of the troops was handed over to a few generals. Their daily routine was to look at the intelligence reports sent from within the borders of Zhongzhou, analyze the situation, and come up with ideas to continue tricking the feudal vassals of Zhongzhou, causing them to either split up, form alliances, or mutilate themselves. Basically, they could get off work and go home before it was dark. Not only that, but they were also so free that they sent people to reorganize the refugees nearby and reclaim the wasteland. They looked like they were going to fight a long war. Old Master Sun Wen was even more extreme. He got a vegetable field and would wake up early every day to take a stroll, watering and fertilizing the seedlings before the sun rose. Not only did he plant vegetables, but he also raised a nest of rabbits and built a medium-sized rabbit house. He planned to eat rabbit meat in hot pot with Qiguan Rang when it snowed. Rather than saying it was a war, it was better to say that it was to experience the life of retirement in advance. According to his own grandson's estimation, Old Master Sun Wen had probably gained about 5 kilograms in the past year. His originally thin cheeks had become rounder. Others might have aged a year, but old Master Sun Wen seemed to have become 10 years younger. It's good to be idle. This old man won't have any regrets in the future. At least I've enjoyed my old age. Sun Wen sighed and stiffly changed the topic. If there's any regret, it's probably that I couldn't find a good marriage for Prime Minister Lan Lan. Feng Longzi's son is settled, but why is such an obedient child like Lan Lan still single? I don't know how many years this old bag of bones can live, and whether he can see his great-grandchildren. Qiguan Rang lowered his head and looked straight ahead. He feigned ignorance and refused to respond to old Master Sun Wen's words. A year or two ago, Sun Wen was still quite reserved. At most, he would brag about his grandson Sun Lan in front of him and crazily recommend that Sun Lan was a good candidate for a son-in-law. After they became familiar with each other, old Master Sun Wen was no longer reserved. He would chat awkwardly every day. It was not that Qiguan Rang did not understand what Sun Wen meant, but this concerned his daughter's lifelong happiness. Qiguan Rang did not want to make a hasty decision. Even if Sun Lan was a good young man, he might not be suitable for his daughter. Old Master Sun Wen was anxious, but there was nothing he could do. Who asked his little pig to like the cabbages from other people's vegetable garden? Old Master Sun Wen sighed faintly when he ran into a wall every day. He did not even have the mood to go to the rabbit house to take a look. The rabbit in the rabbit house was caught by his grandson. The old master happened to like furry little things, so he kept it to raise. Rabbits gave birth quickly, so they could eat 2 more hot pot meals in winter. Old Master Sun Wen lived a leisurely life as if he was retired. The few young people and newcomers who were entrusted with important tasks were not so comfortable. Sun Lan was busy until the moon was high in the sky. At this time, the young man's figure had grown a lot. Although he was not burly, he was not weak either. His back was straight, and his face looked thinner than before. His skin was slightly tanned, and his eyebrows were slender and longer than other young men of his age. His almond-shaped eyes carried the unique vigor and sharpness of his age. After more than 2 years of training in the military camp, the shy little boy had become more outgoing and developed in a different direction. Every time old Master Sun Wen saw his grandson like this, he wished he could grind the pearls he collected into powder and apply it on his face. Didn't he know that becoming an official depended on one's appearance? He was so tan that it did not conform to the mainstream aesthetic standards at all. Sun Lan said helplessly, "Lord Lu doesn't care about appearance. Nowadays, the atmosphere is different from when grandfather was still around." Other things aside, Qi Kuang under the Lord's tent was famous for being ugly. His appearance was unworthy of his parents, and his legs were crippled. In the past, with such a condition, he could not even touch the threshold of becoming an official, let alone being placed in an important position. Why is a man so fair? Sun Lan had been in the military camp for a long time, and he increasingly felt that muscles were a man's romance. Unfortunately, due to congenital limitations, he could not train his muscles to the point where he could only tighten his soft abdomen. At this moment, old Master Sun Wen looked at his grandson, who had returned from a long journey, and his old face was about to droop. His grandson was tanned again. If it wasn't for the old man's good eyesight, he probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference between his grandson and the Dark Knight. The Lord sent a letter saying that we will probably have to rest for a year next year. Sun Wen pointed at the mat opposite him, indicating for his grandson to sit down and talk. "It's time for you to pick up your studies in the Golden Scale Academy." A trace of astonishment flashed across Sun Lan's eyes. He could not help but sit up straight and straighten his back. "Grandfather, do you mean for me to go back?" Sun Wen nodded and patiently explained to Sun Lan, "The army will have to rest for a whole year. The chores during this period are just repetitive things to you. It's a waste of time to do them. It's better to go back to the Golden Scale Academy and study hard with the teachers to strengthen your foundation." Sun Lan had done well at the front line for the past 2 years. He was more capable and experienced in many things than some of the elders. Chapter 1733. Sun Lan's official career did not mean that he could climb higher just by doing well. He also needed to improve his knowledge and learn how to manage his connections. In the past, the connections in the bureaucracy were mostly made up of the aristocrat's bloodline, but it was different now. Old Master Sun Wen had lived for more than 50 years. His eyes were very sharp. When others were still ignorant, he could see the connection between the Golden Scale Academy and the bureaucracy in the future. If most of the talents cultivated by the Golden Scale Academy entered the bureaucracy in the future, the influence of the aristocrat's bloodline would be weakened. At the same time, the relationships of schoolmates, peers, and peers would become the mainstream in the bureaucracy. Sun Wen did not want his grandson to become a busybody, but the bureaucracy was not something a lone ranger could do. Many times, one needed the support and help of connections. If Sun Lan wanted to become an official to realize his dreams and plead for the people, then the first thing he needed to do was to protect himself. Only then would he have the chance to achieve his dreams. Sun Wen was experienced. He could see through some things. Naturally, he hoped that his grandson would take fewer detours under his guidance. Sun Lan was not as complicated as his grandfather thought. He nodded and agreed. But, I can't bear to leave you, grandfather. You're already so old, yet you're still acting like a spoiled child. Sun Wen was very happy, but he still had to be arrogant. He thought of something and said with a smile, "When you go back, remember to be smarter. Do you know the words that the Lord always says?" The words. The pavilion closest to the water enjoys the moonlight first. That's interesting. Sun Wen said, "When Zheng's father-in-law is too difficult to deal with, then you should be smarter and start with his daughter. If you can win the heart of a beauty, when Zheng can't continue to pretend to be deaf and mute. Alright, there's one thing you have to remember. Don't be reckless and don't overstep your boundaries. If there's someone unfaithful in the Sun family, grandfather won't forgive you." Sun Wen encouraged his grandson to chase after the girl he liked, but he didn't encourage his grandson to be a scumbag. If Sun Lan really did something she shouldn't have done before marriage, according to Qiguan Rang's protective personality, he would definitely fall out with Sun Wen. Sun Wen was old. He did not know how many years he could live. If he went, could Sun Lan defeat Qiguan Rang? He would be torn apart by that old fox in a matter of minutes. Sun Lan was also a youth who had been in the army for 2 years. He was no longer the innocent and naive boy he used to be. He could even understand some dirty words, let alone his grandfather. Once she was nervous, her original nature was exposed again, and her slightly dark complexion revealed a blush. "Grandpa, what are you talking about? I'm not that kind of person," Sun Wen snorted. "That's for the best. Otherwise, I'm afraid that I'll have to send my son off." "Sun Lan?" Sun Wen asked, "Do you know how far Qiguan Rang's daughter can draw a bow?" Sun Lan had a bad feeling about this. Qiguan Jingwei was strong from a young age, but this was normal. Girls were stronger than boys in their childhood. How many June? June was the same unit of weight as a stone. 30 Jin was a June, and 4 June was a stone. The so-called strength of 1,000 caddies referred to the strength of 30,000 Jin. It was a metaphor for the strength of an object. Sun Wen's expression was indescribable. He looked at his grandson with pity in his eyes. "It's 5 caddies, but I'm still young. In a few years, it won't be this number anymore." What did this mean? This meant that if his grandson really married Qiguan Jingwei, and there was a conflict and domestic violence, Qiguan Jingwei could throw Sun Lan out with one hand. If Sun Lan really liked Qiguan Jingwei and wanted to pursue her, then he had to pursue her seriously and treat her well. Not to mention that Qiguan Jingwei had a super difficult father. She alone was enough to give Sun Lan a hard time. Sun Lan? 5 caddies? 150 caddies? Sun Lan's weight was less than 150 caddies. This shock lingered until the next day, and it even affected his work. There were a bunch of wrong words. Fortunately, the important matters of the military camp were written on bamboo paper. If they were changed to bamboo slips, a single wrong word would waste a lot of time. Feng Yi saw that he was not in the right state of mind, and that things were a mess. She asked out of concern, "Why are you frowning? If you're not feeling well, why don't you get off work early and go back to rest?" Sun Lan wanted to say something but stopped. He could not help but think about what his grandpa had said. Will it increase in a few years? How do you know? Jingwei doesn't look like she was born with divine strength. Most of the female students in the Golden Scale Academy are like this. Qiguan Jingwei is not the strongest among her peers. She's barely average. Barely considered average? Didn't this mean that there was someone stronger than Qiguan Jingwei who could draw a heavier bow? Sun Lan had only heard of Lord Jiang. When she was 12, she used to draw a bow that was more than one caddy, which was about 5 caddies. But wasn't that born with divine strength? Why were the female students in the Golden Scale Academy so exaggerated? Wrongly. You've always been in contact with Chongqing, right? Before Feng Yi joined the army, the unreliable Feng Zhen had written a reliable character for his son to use in the coronation ceremony. Those who were familiar with him would call him by his character, which made them more intimate. Yes, what about it? Sun Lan asked. Then do you know? Chongqing's strength seems to be. Feng Yi's expression was calm. I know. Is there anything wrong? Sun Lan said dejectedly, it takes me a lot of effort to draw a bow that is 1 caddy full. I don't know if Jinghui will like it. Feng Yi said, everyone has their strengths and weaknesses. Why bother about this? If you're not as strong as others, just learn to be smarter than others. Sun Lan, brother, you're really open-minded. The problem was, would a girl like a weak chicken that was more useless than herself? Sun Lan had been in the army for a long time. Although he was not infected with the idea of a straight man, he also thought that girls liked men who were bullier. In order to be bullier, he worked hard to gain weight and grow taller. He worked hard to make himself look darker and more masculine. In the end, in the future, when they carried each other, it would most likely be Jinghui hugging him and not him hugging Jinghui. So, TSK? Instead of worrying about this, why don't you think about whether there was anyone else watching Jinghui during the 2 years you were not around? Sun Lan's heart was instantly pierced by thousands of arrows. Qiguan Jinghui was about 2 years older than Chongqing. Calculating the time, she would be 15 years old around the beginning of next spring. She was already a big girl. Wouldn't her peers keep an eye on this fresh flower? Lan and Jinghui are childhood sweethearts. How can their friendship be compared to others? Sun Lan clenched his fists, but his words were not convincing. Feng Yi said, that's true. I wish you good luck. There was no sincerity in these words. Instead, there was a hint of a smile. She was ready to watch a good show. Sun Lan took a deep breath. He wished he could immediately pack his bags and go back to Wanzhou to continue studying at the Golden Scale Academy. In order not to fall behind too much in their studies, the Golden Scale Academy would send him and Feng Yi a copy of the new teaching materials for the past 2 years so that they could continue studying in their free time. If he went back to school now, it would be difficult to maintain his top 3 ranking, but he wouldn't fall below 50, right? Sun Lan was anxious. If he became a slacker, he would be even more unlikable. Right. Before leaving with a pile of documents, Feng Yi looked at her good friend with a faint smile and mercilessly stabbed him. A while ago, Chongqing sent me a letter. She mentioned Jinghui. She said that Jinghui felt that the pale-faced young man was more likable. Sun Lan was bloody from the stab. That night, he went back to rummage through the boxes and cabinets. Sun Wen came back from a walk after dinner and almost had no place to rest. What are you looking for? Half of Sun Lan's body was about to fit into the big box. Without turning her head, she said, Grandpa, where's the whitening pearl powder you prepared? Chapter 1734. Lan, you're exaggerating. On the official road more than 10 miles away from Zhanjiang Pass, hundreds of troops dressed as guards were guarding a few carriages. Feng Yi's smiling voice floated out of the carriage, followed by the clear rebuttal of a young man with a hint of embarrassment and annoyance. The person who retorted was none other than Sun Lan. Just by listening to the young man's voice, one could imagine his angry expression. Wrongly, your face is as white as jade. Of course you don't have to worry. How can you understand our sadness? Sun Lan pouted angrily while stirring the jade cup with a small jade spoon. From time to time, he would dig a few spoonfuls from a dozen small sandalwood boxes on the table and throw them into the jade cup to stir. After working for most of the day, he carefully applied the sticky product in the jade cup to his face. When Feng Yi came in, she saw Sun Lan with a face mask. Only his eyes and mouth were exposed. The rest of his face was covered by a thick layer of pearl rice powder mask. When Feng Yi saw his attitude, even he, who had a high level of humor, laughed. "You don't understand. This is a very popular whitening method in Wanzhou." Sun Lan took a small mirror and looked at himself. The thick thing on his face was not very comfortable, and he spoke carefully for fear of breaking the mask. "Many celebrities are very fond of it. The effect is not bad. Don't you think my grandfather is getting younger? He said he does it every 3 days. He really looks a lot younger." Sun Lan was as busy as a husky in Zhanjiang Pass. During the day before dawn, he would wake up to exercise for an hour, eat breakfast, and then go to work. He was busy until sunset before he could get off work. After dinner, he would continue reading the Golden Scale Academy's textbooks until the early hours of the morning. Every day was packed to the brim. How could he have time to learn about the fashion in Wanzhou? So, how did Sun Lan know about these popular beauty treatments in Wanzhou? Speaking of this, Sun Lan felt that his worldview had been reshaped. His grandfather had collected all kinds of ways to use pearl face masks. He had records of what accessories to use for each mask and how many accessories to use. If it weren't for this, Sun Lan wouldn't have known that his grandfather lived such a comfortable life. He only slept for 6 hours a day, but his grandfather was so free that he cooked rabbit meat hot pot and took care of his skin. Hearing this, Feng Yi almost couldn't react. Old man's son uses a bedtime mask to maintain his beauty? In his mind, he pictured the scene of the old man carefully making a facial mask and reading a book. He was so scared that he shivered all over. This method? I've never heard of it. Feng Yi knew that pearl powder could nourish one's skin, but she had never heard that it could be used in such a way. Mixing it into a sticky substance and applying it to one's face. It was strange. Sun Lan said, "It said that it's trending in recent years. In the south, the river channels specialized in producing river pearls. There's a pearl diver here who was deeply moved by the hard work of her parents. She was inspired to learn how to artificially make pearls. He reared the clams in captivity and used artificial methods to make pearls. He made a lot of money from this, and his neighbors followed suit. This caused the price of the river pearls in the vicinity to plummet, and the river pearls could not be sold. At this time, there's another woman. It's said that her ancestor was a female official in the Xia dynasty. She's learned many beautifying methods and countless secret recipes. These secret recipes all require pearl powder to be used as medicine. Most of the people living near the dredging river made a living by collecting pearls. Collecting pearls was arduous and dangerous, and tragedies would happen from time to time. With the advent of chaos, the lives of these pearl divers became more difficult. They couldn't even eat, let alone play with pearls. Even so, the people who dredged the river couldn't stop their work of collecting pearls. Instead, they had to collect more river pearls to make a living. This led to an increase in the production of pearls in the past few years, but the price of pearls had been falling. The pearl divers couldn't complain about it. When Feng Yi was still studying in the academy, the headmaster of the academy once mentioned this matter. She never expected that the people there had learned how to artificially make pearls, causing the river pearls to be more abundant. Feng Yi said, "The aristocrats are so fond of pearl powder and use it to nourish one's skin." The price of the pearls, Sun Lan smiled and said, "Of course it has risen, but not by too much. This is a good thing. The pearl divers who dredged the river have all started to raise river pearls, causing the price of the river pearls to plummet. Many pearl divers have lost everything. Now that there's this way, some pearls of poor quality are sold in bulk to cosmetic merchants. They are ground into powder and sell very well. Many people who depend on them have a way to make a living." Feng Yi listened and her slightly furrowed brows relaxed a little. Sun Lan said again, "Grandpa told me. Do you know who the big buyer of the river pearls is?" Feng Yi asked, "Who is it?" Sun Lan said, "General Fu's family." Feng Yi's heart skipped a beat. She said in surprise, "General Fu is still at the front line and he's alone. Why would he be involved in this business?" Although it was only a few words, Feng Yi could guess the huge profits hidden behind this business. The law didn't explicitly state that officials couldn't be involved in business, but fighting for profits with the people was indeed an act that the scholars despised. Sun Lan shook her head and said, "Grandpa's original words, that wolf cub brought back a good wife. His ancestors must have been lucky in their previous lives." Feng Yi understood. "Lady Hui." "Yes, an amazing girl. You really can't underestimate her." In Jiang? With Ji's encouragement, Hui Xian didn't trap herself in the backyard. Instead, she thought about how to start a business and find a way out. The spinning wheel with the help of water had long been completed and put into trial operation 2 to 3 years ago. The results were naturally good, but because cotton hadn't been mass-produced, the variety of these spinning wheels was limited. Currently, it was still small. But it was enough to open a cloth shop. She studied a lot of cloth dyeing and printing documents, as well as the content of various spices and rouge. Combining the situation, she opened a comprehensive shop that sold rouge, face powder, and finished cloth. In Jiang? For the sake of Ji and Fu Wang, this shop's business was good. Of course, Hui? Her ambition wasn't as simple as raising a family. She wanted to make a lot of money. She wanted to expand the shop, and the quality of service and goods were the most important. In the beginning, she had been in charge. After the shop was on the right track, she didn't slack off. She checked every few days and was strict. The palace had the habit of using pearl powder to nourish one's skin. She didn't want to miss this business opportunity, so she needed a stable supply of cheap pearls. By chance, she found out that the river pearls were abundant in Dri, and the price was terrifyingly low. The first half of her life was very hard, but the second half of her life was very lucky. She sent people to buy river pearls and bought many secret recipes from a pearl diver. Although the pearl diver claimed that the secret recipe was a secret recipe of the Xia dynasty, she didn't believe it. If there was such a secret recipe, there was no reason that the noble ladies in the aristocratic circle didn't know about it. The Xia dynasty had indeed been destroyed for many years, but the inheritance of the aristocratic families hadn't been broken. What were the aristocratic families? They were the aristocratic families who lived happily and were above the royal family. How could they not know about the secret recipe of the palace? Chapter 1735. He had doubts in his heart, but he didn't say anything. She carefully studied the many secret recipes she had bought and found that these methods were somewhat similar to the existing methods. The supplementary materials added were also good for nourishing the body. After using them, even if they were not good for the body, there was no harm. She might as well try them to see the effect. More importantly, wisdom? He saw a huge business opportunity here. If he could grasp it, he would definitely become rich overnight. River pearls were so cheap, and the people of the world, no matter men or women, had a morbid pursuit of beauty and whitening. There was no need to worry about a lack of business. Didn't you see how 5 minerals powder became popular in the early years? Wasn't it because this thing could strengthen the body and make people whiter? As the saying goes, whiteness covers all ugliness. After whitening, no matter how ugly a person was, his or her looks would immediately increase by several points. Furthermore, because being an official was linked to one's looks, there were even more people who pursued whitening and beautifying their skin. Whitening and beautifying were not only pursued by women, but also by men who were even more particular about it. They could not wait to live in a beauty camera. If this facial mask is really effective, there is no need to worry about not having a market. Opportunities were only given to those who were prepared and had brains. There was no doubt that if they caught him, they would make a huge profit. The people who relied on the river pearls to make a living had also made a lot of money. Among them, the ones who benefited the most were the 2 pearl divers. At this point, he had most likely discovered that these 2 pearl divers were both ginger, the salted fish in Ji Yi's livestream room. One of them came earlier. The original owner of the body had gone into the water to collect pearls, but he was entangled by the seaweed and almost drowned. After he was rescued, he woke up in the live streaming room and cried, saying that he had been visited by a mountain ghost in his dream and taught pearl divers how to artificially cultivate river pearls. Coincidentally, in reality, this European queen cultivated freshwater pearls. It was said that her father's family had several mines. Even if she failed to cultivate pearls, she could still go home and inherit hundreds of millions of yuan. The other lucky emperor came a little later, more than a year and a half after the first one. She was also a pearl diver, just that a man dressed as a woman. Although he was a pure man, he was a reserve coder who lived a very refined life, a university monk. This European emperor spent 2 hours a day taking care of his skin. His nails were always trimmed neatly. In the words of the European emperor, when he looked at people with his nostrils, they would only see his delicate little nostrils because the messy nose hairs were trimmed neatly. When it came to cosmetics and makeup techniques, he was very familiar with them. His makeup skills made the tomboy blush with shame. According to the lucky emperor, he had an account with millions of fans on Twitter. He was a cross-dresser who could bend countless men after putting on makeup. Once he attached himself to this pearl diver's body, he couldn't stand it anymore. Look at that pair of messy eyebrows, look at that coarse and yellowish face, look at that flat and greasy nose, the densely packed blackheads, the thick pores. Her face was covered with acne that she hadn't seen for a long time, and her mouth was filled with thick dental calculi. Even when she spoke, there was a foul smell in her voice. What was even worse was that this girl had celery and garlic for breakfast. Her appetite was really big. The European emperor, who was looking at himself in the water, was so disgusted that he had goosebumps all over his body. He didn't know if he should deal with his dental calculus first, rinse his mouth, or wash his face to get rid of the pimples. Usually at this time, he should be sitting in the dormitory applying a facial mask to rest. However, there was nothing in this shabby place, so he simply replaced it with pearl powder. Those people who want to travel to ancient times must have holes in their brains. The European emperor didn't hide his disgust at all. Coincidentally, he met a person who was sent to secretly investigate the ancient prescription. He presented all kinds of pearl powder facial masks to them and used the title of Great Xia Imperial Secret Prescription to extort a large sum of money from them. He used this money to buy things, left some money for the original owner, and finally returned with a full load. This money was earned by the European emperor, and the things he bought with this money also belonged to the European emperor. It's a pity that there are no papayas. Otherwise, she could have added breast enhancement. This girl's baby will probably be hungry in the future, right? In the eyes of outsiders, the European emperor's trip to transmigration was quite enjoyable, but he himself gave a bad review on the forum. It was fine that he had transmigrated to become a girl, but his cleavage was barren, his skin was rough and yellowish, his face was covered with acne, and he had a mouth full of dental calculi and bad breath. The experience was terrible. As expected, this maverick European emperor became popular. The number of views on a certain makeup tutorial and makeup imitation tutorial soared, and he had more than 10 million fans. Many people even joked that the European emperor should continue to be a delicate young master, and not become a coder who was destined to go bald. Didn't the host's live broadcast room explode from time to time, causing the Weibo platform server to crash every now and then? For more than 10 years, the heaven-sacrificing code monkey could circle the earth 3.5 times. Was it because of the blessing and wisdom of these two European emperors? With his business acumen, various types of pearl face masks became popular in the aristocratic circles. The aristocratic ladies and noble ladies chased after them, and the scholars and celebrities also praised them. People nowadays really had the spirit of seeking death in their bones. In order to whiten their skin, they would even smear lead powder on their faces. Many cosmetics contained excessive amounts of heavy metals. Weren't they afraid of poisoning if they used too much of it? More than 10 years ago, it was fashionable in the aristocratic circles to take 5 stones powdered together and sit opposite each other to get rid of lice. Now it was fashionable to wear facial masks at gatherings. Just the thought of a group of celebrities wearing pearl face masks playing with the flowing water was very mesmerizing. As a member of the health team, Old Master Sun Wen had always focused on maintaining his youthful appearance in recent years. Now, he finally sold this Amway to his grandson. Sun Lan looked at Feng Yi's face with jealousy. The two of them were about the same age and were both teenagers. Why was it that Sun Lan was tanned and had a few annoying pimples, while Feng Yi's face was fair, smooth and translucent, and her skin was so white that it was translucent? Looking at this diligent brother in front of him with his head lowered, Sun Lan could not help but give him the Amway. Do you want to have one too? Feng Yi smiled faintly. No, I don't really like these and I don't need them. Don't need, Feng Yi, too. These 3 words kept echoing in Sun Lan's ears, making him want to bend forward in frustration. A man's face is also very important, Sun Lan said. That last Changxing does have some good colors. Feng Yi smiled and asked, Is my color not good enough? Sun Lan. What a shameless childhood friend. Even though they were fooling around, the two of them still seized the time to revise their lessons. They had studied in the Golden Scale Academy for several years and knew how profound the lessons in the academy were. In the past 2 years, the number of teaching materials that had been mailed to them had increased exponentially, and they were constantly revised and republished. Even though the two of them had worked very hard, there were too many chores in the military. It was impossible for them to keep up with the group of classmates in the academy who were taught by famous teachers and studied seriously every day. They did not wish to be among the best, but they hoped that their exam results would not be too bad. You supervise me, and I'll supervise you. The two of them exerted the same vigor as if they were sprinting for the college entrance examination. Other than sleeping, washing, and eating, they spent the rest of their time studying hard. After walking for more than a month, the group finally arrived in Wanzhou. Looking at the towering city that she had not seen for a long time, Feng Yi's heart was filled with emotion. She looked forward to seeing her family in the city, but at the same time, she was worried that the academy's mock exam would disappoint the headmaster. Lan, why are you shivering? Are you very cold? Sun Lan took deep breaths, his hands shaking from nervousness. Rong Li, don't you think I've become much fairer? Chapter 1736. Looking at the trembling Sun Lan, even someone as kind as Feng Yi couldn't help but laugh unkindly. He couldn't help but say, You're indeed much fairer. Now you're a handsome young man. Do you feel at ease now? The pearl powder mask did have some effect. Sun Lan's face looked much fairer, and the acne on her face disappeared, leaving only shallow acne marks. Looking at Sun Lan's pitiful look, Feng Yi said the effect was 10%, which made him feel at ease. Sun Lan let out a long sigh of relief. He immediately realized that he was acting a little silly, so he couldn't help but smile shyly. It's good that you're fairer. His current appearance wouldn't be despised by Jingwei. Feng Yi invited his friend, Lan, do you want to rest in my house for a few days? He knew about Sun Lan's situation. The Sun family only had Sun Lan and Old Master Sun Wen. The Old Master was at the front line of Zhanjiang Pass, and only a few servants and housekeepers were left to take care of the mansion in the city. Sun Lan would be alone in the mansion, so it would be better to stay in his house for a few days. Sun Lan declined Feng Yi's invitation. He hadn't been back for a few years, and there were still some chores to take care of, such as the performance of the housekeepers and servants, the management of the mansion, whether there was any embezzlement. If there were any dirty hands and feet, he should get rid of them as soon as possible, so that the mansion wouldn't be in a mess. Even though Sun Lan had no relatives at home, she still had to go back to reorganize. Feng Yi was sensible and didn't force it. That's good. When you're done, we'll go to the school together. Both families received the news of their return in advance. The housekeeper of Feng Yi's mansion had been waiting outside the city for a few days, but there was no news from Sun Lan. The housekeeper who welcomed Feng Yi was very enthusiastic, and he looked at the young master with gratification. This housekeeper wasn't only an old man by Feng Zhen's side, but also an elder who watched Feng Yi grow up. Looking at the handsome and elegant young master, he was so excited that he almost cried. He couldn't help but say that Feng Yi was taller and more handsome, but also thinner and darker. If he didn't restrain himself, he might have overstepped his boundaries. Seeing the familiar old man, Feng Yi smiled gently and helped him up before the old housekeeper could greet him. Ever since we received the news, Madam sent me to wait for you outside the city. You're finally here. The old housekeeper's eyes were brimming with tears. He was truly moved by Feng Yi's return. Feng Yi sighed and asked about the situation at home. The old butler said, everything is good in the manor. Feng Yi asked, I received a letter from home earlier. I heard that mother caught a cold. Is she feeling better? The mother he spoke of was naturally not his biological mother, but Feng Zhen's current second wife, Wan Xiu. Feng Yi had always respected this stepmother. Before Wan Xiu married Feng Zhen, she had been living in the Feng manor with the tacit cooperation of the father and son. Although the young Feng Yi was carefully taken care of by the housekeeper and servants, he was not as meticulous as the female elders in many aspects. After they became familiar with each other, Wan Xiu often took care of Feng Yi's daily life, which also laid a good foundation for the mother and son. Apart from the age difference, the relationship between mother and son was probably closer than that of an ordinary landowning household. Madam has been feeling better for a long time. It's just that she has been busy with the affairs of the manor recently and can't make time for it. That's why she sent me to fetch eldest Lang Jun. It was rare for a stepmother and a stepson to get along well. The old housekeeper was also very pleased that the two had a good relationship. After all, everything went well in a harmonious family. Feng Yi said seriously, Mother is an elder. How could she be sent to wait for the younger generation? The housekeeper smiled and said, Eldest Lang Jun is right. After some small talk, Feng Yi noticed the situation with Sun Lan and frowned slightly. The two of them had rushed back in a hurry, but they had already sent a message to the manor in advance. Why didn't anyone come to fetch Sun Lan? However, it was not convenient to ask these questions in public, so they could only keep it to themselves. Because of the initial city planning, Jiang Fei's subordinates lived in the inner circle. Most of Ji Yi's officials lived in the inner circle. In Salted Fish's words, they were the first or second circle. Feng Zhen was the first batch to receive the land deed for the house. Sun Wen joined later, so his house was naturally located further away. Even so, the two of them still traveled together for a while. Madam, eldest Lang Jun is back. Just as Feng Yi's carriage arrived at the main entrance of the manor, a servant passed the news to Wan Xiu. Rong Li is back? Wan Xiu had lived a comfortable and contented life in the past few years. Time did not leave any traces on her face. Instead, it added some charm to her face. Looking at her face, Zhen's face was like a goose's egg, and her skin was smooth and creamy. Her seductive phoenix eyes were filled with ripples, unlike the dead deep pool they used to be. Her eyes were slender and curved, and her arched eyebrows were like willow leaves in February. Her body was graceful and slim, and her whole body was full of mature charm. Looking at her appearance, no one would believe that she was in her early 30s. People would even believe that she was a young woman in her early 20s. Greetings, mother. Wan Xiu said, Get up quickly. My son is back. Let me take a good look at him. Looking at the handsome Feng Yi, Wan Xiu's heart was filled with a myriad of emotions and a faint sense of regret. If only her first child could be born into the world, perhaps. Thinking of this, Wan Xiu was too regretful to continue thinking. She had a child with her scumbag ex-husband, but that scumbag ex-husband was too much of a scumbag. Under the urging of his ex-mother-in-law and concubines, he doubted Wan Xiu's innocence and insisted that Wan Xiu had been defiled in a bandit village. He even brought up a fallacious theory: a woman's first child was the blood of her first husband. If she wanted to give birth to her husband's child, her first child had to be cleanly aborted to wash away the stain left behind by her first husband. Thus, the scumbag husband personally gave Wan Xiu an insidious substance that caused her to have an abortion, causing her to lose her child. Wan Xiu's body was already weak, and it was difficult for her to get pregnant. Coupled with that blow, she had no news even after marrying Feng Zhen for so long. Of course, Feng Zhen's frequent business trips was also a big reason. Now that she was over 30, she no longer had any thoughts of getting pregnant. She could only pour all her tenderness into Feng Yi. "Mother, your son is doing very well now." Feng Yi turned around for her to see. "I know you're doing well, but I don't feel at ease until I see it with my own eyes." Wan Xiao'er saw that his clothes were a little thin, and the fabric was a little faded and hairy. She said gently, "I asked the servants to tidy up your room a few days ago. Go and see if there's anything missing. Later, I'll ask the embroidery maids to come and measure for you and make a few new clothes. You can't wear the clothes that were left in the manor in the past." Feng Yi said, "Okay." When school ends at the Golden Scale Academy, Changxing might come to the manor. Wan Xiao'er said with a smile, "Changxing has become more and more beautiful these 2 years. She's also sensible and considerate. She's afraid that I'll be lonely in the manor, so she often comes to visit." Feng Yi's smile deepened. At the same time, Chapter 1737. Sun Lan went all the way back to the mansion. No one came out to greet him when the carriage arrived at the door. The old door was closed and the entrance was deserted. Even the gatekeeper was nowhere to be seen. Although Sun Lan had a good temper, he was a little angry at this scene. Before he could speak, he heard some messy footsteps. It turned out that the housekeeper heard the noise and hurried over. He saw that Sun Lan was much more plump than before. The housekeeper apologized immediately. Sun Lan didn't say anything and he couldn't figure out what he meant. He saw that Sun Lan was a little guilty, but Sun Lan didn't blame him. The housekeeper was relieved for the time being. "I'm tired. I'll go back first." After saying that, he walked past the housekeeper and stepped into the mansion. Looking at Sun Lan, who didn't show his emotions, the housekeeper felt a little uneasy. When Sun Lan saw the main courtyard, which seemed to have been tidied up but was not clean everywhere, the dissatisfaction in her heart deepened. The accompanying guards packed up the things in the carriages. Most of them were books. Not only were there teaching materials sent by the Golden Scale Academy, but there were also a few boxes containing Sun Lan's homework and reading notes. All of them were neatly stacked. A few of them were Sun Lan's belongings and personal clothes. Sun Lan came back a little late on the first day. He reviewed his homework and planned to find his friends tomorrow to understand the situation and familiarize himself with the teaching style of the academy. He and Feng Yi had been off school for more than 2 years. They didn't know what new tricks the Golden Scale Academy had up their sleeves. The winter night turned dark quickly. Sun Lan ordered people to light a few lamps. After dinner, he practiced a set of boxing and continued to read. At about 9 o'clock in the evening, the guard's attendant called him softly. "What's the matter?" "The housekeeper came just now. He said it's getting late and advised you to go to bed early." Sun Lan asked, "What time is it now?" He didn't feel sleepy. It shouldn't be his usual sleeping time. The attendant answered, "Just at the beginning of the evening." It was still very early. There were still 2 hours before his usual sleeping time. "But, forget it. I have a lot of things to do tomorrow morning. It's better to go to bed early." He was the only one in the mansion. Everything had to go through him. There were a lot of trivial things. However, Sun Lan didn't expect that there would be a surprise, or rather, a scare, waiting for him in his room. After a simple bath, Sun Lan put on her pajamas and prepared to sleep. It was dark in the room, and he felt sleepy again. In a daze, he wanted to lie down on the bed. Sun Lan couldn't help but sigh when she felt the warmth of the blanket. It is easy to go from frugality to extravagance, but difficult to go from extravagance to frugality. Staying in the military camp for more than 2 years, he slept on a hard, cold mattress. Every winter, he felt like he had entered an ice house. He had to curl up and wait for his body temperature to warm up the mattress before he felt better. Although the servants in the residence were slacking off, they still remembered to use a hand warmer to warm the bed, so they were not hopeless. With that thought in mind, Sun Lan straightened her feet. Her cold feet suddenly touched 2 soft and warm lumps. Not only was he scared awake by the heat, but the thing was also shivering because of his cold feet. "What is it?" Sun Lan scolded sternly. He sat up in fright, pulled his feet back, and lifted the blanket. The thing reacted quickly. It even wanted to put its hands on his feet and put them in front of her chest. What a shameless ghost. Sun Lan quickly took out her sword and unsheathed it, ready to kill the demon. The guards outside heard the noise and rushed in. Before they saw anything, they heard a woman crying and begging. The two guards on night duty looked at each other and tacitly took a step back. They asked what happened. Sun Lan was still in a state of shock. She vaguely saw a naked woman lying at the end of the bed and realized that her feet had just touched something. She was both embarrassed and annoyed. She clenched her sword tightly and gnashed her teeth. "It's okay. Get out of here." The guards exchanged ambiguous looks. Nothing needed to be said. Sun Lan's sword never left his body. With a cold face, he lit all the lights in the room. He found the naked woman kneeling at the end of the bed. Her long black hair was draped over her back, and some of it fell to her shoulders. It made her exposed skin look fairer and more delicate. Sun Lan looked away in embarrassment. "Who are you?" The woman, or rather, the girl, looked to be about 15 or 16 years old. She had a well-developed body. "I'm here to warm your feet." Warm his feet? Strip naked and climb into his bed to warm his feet? Sun Lan had learned something new. Even a hand warmer was better than this thing. Why did he have to find someone to occupy his bed? If not, he could put on some clothes and leave. What was the point of stripping naked? Sun Lan stood far away and spoke her mind very frankly. The young girl who heard it was both embarrassed and embarrassed. She was simply too ashamed to show her face. "I'm also here to serve eldest Langjun. To warm his feet." They were girls who could sleep with him. There was no need to give them any status. They were even worse than cheap concubines. They used their bodies to warm the bed and their master's feet. If the master had any needs, he could also use them to vent. Jiang had caused a ruckus that year. All the families were smart and did not dare to have concubines. Because they did not have enough merits, they were not qualified to have concubines. Once a concubine was taken, it would be a crime of overstepping the rules. If it was a light punishment, he would lose his position. If it was a heavy punishment, his whole family would be in trouble. But a man could not have only one wife in his life. No matter how delicious the food was, after a few years, they would get tired of it. They needed a change of taste. Even if it was a pile of stale shit, as long as it was something that these men had not eaten before, they would want to try it. Therefore, there was another meaning to the term feet-warming maid. Not only was she responsible for warming the master's feet, but she also had to warm the master's body and heart and accompany him to sleep. Sun Lan was used to the dirty talk of the soldiers during his stay in the military camp. After being influenced, he was not so pure anymore. He could understand the girl's subtext. "Oh, did the housekeeper send you here?" He snorted coldly, and the maid shivered in fear upon hearing him. It was not hot in the room and she was naked. It would be strange if she did not shiver. Since when can a servant intervene in the master's private affairs and take charge of the master's room? Sun Lan would never have thought that on his first night back, there would be such a bold girl who wanted to climb into his bed. What did she think he was? He was angry just thinking about it. The foot-warmer girl was about to cry. Under the candlelight, she looked pitiful and cute. Especially her naked body, it was even more stimulating to the energetic young man. If an ordinary rich man saw this, he would most likely accept the girl. Why not eat the meat that was delivered to his door? Sun Lan felt ashamed and angry as if he had been humiliated and fooled. He pointed his sword at the girl and said, "Get out. Get out. Get the housekeeper in here. I want to ask him if he, a servant, wants to turn the world upside down." The housekeeper was lax and did not do his job well. He actually wanted to use women to please him. Just the thought of it disgusted him. She was just a servant. How could she try to play with the master and use such a disgusting method? The mistress of an ordinary aristocratic family would indeed arrange a maid to teach the children who were about to reach adulthood. Whether to reject or accept, they would have to ask the person's opinion. Chapter 1738. What are you waiting for? Get out. Sun Lan wanted to put his sword on the neck of the foot-warming girl. In his eyes, The body that could make a man's heart sway was more humiliating than flirtatious. Even though he was a young man who had never seen a woman naked before, when he saw the feet-warming girl in this state, he felt disgusted and nauseous. Under the orange candlelight, his body looked like a white-skinned domestic pig that had been scalded by hot water. When he thought of how he saw the logisticians slaughtering pigs in the military camp, he looked at the foot-warming girl with even more disgust. The feet-warming girl was frightened by Sun Lan's unprovoked anger, and she even forgot to shed tears that were rolling down her cheeks. She was the housekeeper's most beloved daughter. Before Sun Lan came back, she had heard more than once about this eldest son from her father. Everyone in the mansion knew that Sun Lan loved the noblewoman Qiguan Jingwei. This noblewoman had a high chance of becoming the future legal wife of the mansion. Qiguan Jingwei's daughter had a good temperament and Sun Lan was a generous and kind husband. If she became his concubine, even if she was a foot-warming girl without a title, once she was taken in, she would have a good life in the future. Even if Sun Lan didn't love her, the person in charge of the mansion was her father. Her life wouldn't be too bad. The father and daughter helped each other, and in the future, they would have a son and a daughter. Neither she nor the housekeeper thought about Qiguan Jingwei's and Sun Lan's opinions. Would Qiguan Jingwei allow her husband to have a foot-warming girl before marriage? She would. After all, she had a good temperament. Sun Lan had followed the army for more than 2 years, and this kind noblewoman occasionally took care of the Sun Mansion. Besides, the noblewoman had a high status. Why would she care about a lowly concubine? Which nobleman from an aristocratic family didn't have a woman before marriage? He just didn't have a concubine's child. All the particular families valued the eldest legitimate son the most. They would never have a concubine's eldest son or daughter to embarrass the legal wife. The foot-warming girl didn't want to have the upper hand in childbirth. She only asked Sun Lan to let her have a son and a daughter after the legal wife married and gave birth to the first son. Would Sun Lan refuse angrily? Of course not. There was no reason not to eat a fat piece of meat that was delivered to his doorstep. Moreover, he was young and full of vigor. A virgin chicken could not withstand a woman's teasing. If it wasn't a virgin but an experienced driver, then there would be even less to worry about. He had never expected that Sun Lan would choose to reject him. For a moment, the foot-warming girl was a little confused. Sun Lan's rage skyrocketed until it reached the breaking point. He sneered, "You're not going to leave, are you?" The feet-warming maid opened her mouth to argue, but Sun Lan said to the door, "Come in." "Come in?" While the feet-warming girl was in a daze, the guard who was on guard outside came in with a confused look on his face. No, if the master wanted to pamper a little girl, why did he call the 2 brothers in? Watching the show from the sidelines? Sun Langjun looked rather shy and kind, but he shouldn't have such a weird hobby, right? Or, the little Langjun was a virgin and didn't know how to perform the ceremony of husband and wife? The guard imagined a drama. The feet-warming girl screamed in a low voice and grabbed the quilt to cover her naked body. She suddenly understood why Sun Lan called the 2 guards in. She was so scared that tears streamed down her face. She grabbed the quilt to cover her body with one hand and crawled to Sun Lan's feet with the other. She grabbed his trousers and cried, "Ling, please have mercy on me. I won't dare to do it again. Please have mercy on me. It's just my first offense. Please don't give me to these 2 people. I know I'm wrong. Please have mercy on me, Langdon." The 2 guards were shocked after hearing that. Did he call them in not to watch the show and give them applause, but to give them benefits? Sun Lan was shocked by the feet-warming girl's actions. No matter how good-tempered he was, he couldn't help but lift his foot and kick the other's shoulder. The kick made her roll on the ground twice, and the other's body rolled into the quilt. When he couldn't see the white flesh, the nausea in Sun Lan's throat was slightly suppressed. He pointed at the feet-warming girl and said, "Throw her out and let that old thing come and get her." How did these people usually make up stories and slander him? If he continued to stay in the mansion, would it be him and his grandfather who were in charge of the Sun Mansion, or these servants who were in charge? Sun Lan's words burst the bubble in the guard's heart. The 2 did as they were told. They carried the feet-warming girl, who was rolled into a spring roll, out of the yard. "It's freezing outside. It's not good to do this, is it? Guard still had tender feelings for the fairer sex. Seeing the feet-warming girl shivering and crying like a pear blossom in the rain, his heart softened a little. His Lang Jun was also a ruthless person. He didn't even eat such a beautiful girl who was sent to his mouth, and he even rolled her up and threw her out. He was undoubtedly a straight man. Guardby sneered, "Do your job. The master already dislikes her, and you still pity her. Do you think it's your turn? Is this considered very good? At least she has a quilt. If you throw her into the pond with the quilt, it'll be so embarrassing in this cold weather. That's cruel." The feet-warming girl was really thrown out by Sun Lan. At the same time, he also regretted it. The quilt should be left. The anger subsided, and Sun Lan shivered because of the cold. Even if there was heating in the room, his pajamas were still very thin. Sun Lan grabbed the clothes and put them on. After warming up a little, he began to have a headache about his recklessness just now. Looking at the situation in the mansion, he was afraid that it was as lax as a sieve. There were no servants, and their mouths were probably leaking. After such a mess, when the sun rose tomorrow, he didn't know how this gossip would spread. He scratched his loose bun, and his long hair poured over his shoulders. Sun Lan could only accept his fate and clean up the mess for his recklessness. After so many years in the military camp, Sun Lan was really not the soft and cute little girl he used to be. His methods were also swift and decisive. It should be known that there was no shortage of hooligans and ruffians in the military camp. Their quality was worrying. Even if the political commissar brainwashed them and instilled all kinds of ideas, the speed of cultural edification and literacy could not keep up with the speed of the expansion of the army. As a result, the overall cultural level of the military camp had been half dead. Sun Lan dealt with them all day long. How could he still be a cute little girl who was easy to talk to? Whether it was coercion or threats, in short, he had to let the servants in the mansion know fear and learn to be careful with their words. The best and fastest way was no different from killing a chicken to warn the monkey. Which chicken to kill? Sun Lan sneered. That housekeeper was a good target. When the housekeeper was arrested, he was still chatting with his wife in the quilt and thinking about the future. When Sun Lan's guards rushed in and took him out of the quilt, they followed the clues and arrested the housekeeper's confidants as well. They tied them up and threw them in front of Sun Lan. The housekeeper was still confused. He had worked hard for the Sun family for so long. Even if he didn't get any credit, he still worked hard. Why did Sun Lan treat people who had done meritorious service like this? The atmosphere in the hall was oppressive. Several servants and maids knelt and trembled. Chapter 1739. The butler was forced to kneel for a long time. At first, he begged for mercy on his behalf, but Sun Lan ignored him. He could not continue his one-man show, and his voice slowly died down under Sun Lan's aura. For a moment, only the sound of bamboo slips colliding could be heard. Sun Lan was checking the accounts. The grandfather and grandson had not been in the mansion for the past 2 or 3 years, and the mansion's various expenditure records were done by the butler. Most of the grandfather's salary for the past 2 years went to the treasury, and a small part was used for the mansion's daily expenses and the servants' monthly allowance. However, when Sun Lan sent someone to check, she found that a lot of things were missing from the treasury, and even the salary for the past 2 or 3 years was missing by 20 to 30%. Because the mansion only had the grandfather and grandson, and there were not many servants serving them, Sun Lan could roughly estimate the expenditure at a glance after working in the military logistics for so many years. How could she not know? Someone was greedy, and not only was he greedy, but he was also greedy for his grandfather's salary. Making false accounts was blamed on him? Did they really think that they could embezzle as they pleased just because they never opened the treasury to check? If they did not punish these crafty servants, once the news got out, they would become the laughingstock of outsiders. What was the use of strategizing on the battlefield? If they could even deceive a few crafty servants when they returned to the mansion, what would happen to their reputation? Thinking of this, Sun Lan's eyes were filled with killing intent. All these years, you served us hard, but grandfather and I did not mistreat you, right? Not only did they not mistreat him, but they treated him well. Because of the disaster, grandfather was cold to outsiders, but he treated these people who served him very well. Unfortunately, these people took advantage of him and could not see themselves clearly. Instead, they treated everything in the master's family as their own. The butler's heart skipped a beat, and he knew that he had messed up. He trembled and said, "This old servant was also blinded by lard." The master had already put on such an attitude, and if he continued to be stubborn, he would not be able to get any benefits. It was better to play the emotional card and beg for leniency. In fact, it was not uncommon for a butler to be greedy, but there were not many who were as greedy as him. He was originally just a little greedy. That little bit of money was not a big deal, and he could just make a false account to fool others. The master was not stingy, and Sun Wen did not have time to carefully check the accounts for a few strings of silver. As long as the accounts were not outrageous, they would not care about this matter. After that, Sun Wen and Sun Lan both left the mansion for 2 to 3 years. Furthermore, the housekeeper had a lot of power in his hands. He could easily get close to the property in the mansion. It was too convenient for him to be greedy. Today, he needed to brag to others, so he took some. Tomorrow, his wife wanted to buy some makeup and new clothes, so he took some. The day after that, he was going to a brothel to meet his lover, so he took some. The day after that, a poor relative came to ask for some money, so he took some. In short, it was to buy, and buy to their heart's content, chopping off their hands again and again. The wealth of the Sun residents became his pocket. It was not difficult for him to take and use it however he wanted. After a long time, he became complacent. Not only did he become arrogant, but he also became even more extravagant in spending money. He bought mansions, bought maids to serve him, and lived like a real rich master. When he sobered up a little and saw the gap in the accounts getting bigger and bigger, he knew something was wrong. The master did not care about the 2 strings of coins, but what if the residents lost a few thousand strings of coins? One had to know that Qiguan Rang, Feng Jin, and a few other important officials had annual salaries ranging from 7 to 9,000 strings of coins according to their positions. Zhang Ping and a few other big shots in scientific research had the highest annual salaries. Their salary plus Jiang Yu's allowance was about 10,000 strings of coins. Naturally, Old Man Sun's salary would not exceed this amount. The amount of money that the housekeeper had embezzled over the past few years had directly swallowed Old Man Sun's annual salary. How could his appetite not be big? At this time, the salary was not fully paid. Part of it was replaced with gold and silver, and the other part was rice, meat, cloth, and even antiques. The housekeeper took away the unmarked money because it was convenient to circulate, but it was also easy to be exposed. The gap was too big, and the housekeeper could not balance the accounts. At this time, the news of Sun Lan's return reached his ears, and he was so scared that his legs turned to jelly. It would be fine if Sun Lan did not check the accounts, but once she did, his whole family would die. Therefore, the housekeeper thought of a way to save the country in a roundabout way. If Sun Lan took in his youngest daughter, then he would be half a father-in-law to Sun Lan. If his daughter did not disappoint and was favored by Sun Lan alone, or even if his daughter was pregnant with the eldest son of a concubine. For the sake of the bloodline, even if he embezzled 1,000 strings of coins, this pair of grandfather and grandson would probably be lenient, right? The housekeeper's plan was brilliant, but Sun Lan was not the lecherous person he thought she was. Sun Lan took a glance and knew that the amount of money that the housekeeper and the others had embezzled was enough to kill them. She threw the bamboo slip away. Flog them to death. The housekeeper's expression changed dramatically, and the other accomplices were also frightened. Some cried and some begged for mercy. Sun Lan could not help but sneer and asked, "Do you know who you are?" The housekeeper and the others could not help but shrink back. "If you don't remember, then let me tell you who you are. You are slaves bought by the Sun residents and belong to the lowly register. You are also the private property of the Sun residents." Sun Lan did not leave the slightest face to reveal their background, and the housekeeper felt even more humiliated from head to toe. During the days when Sun Wen and Sun Lan were not around, the housekeeper gradually lived a wealthy life. He lived in a mansion bigger than the Sun residence, and the maids and servants in the mansion were several times that of the Sun residence. Gradually, the housekeeper forgot that his birthplace was not a good one. Sun Lan continued, "According to the current law, those who embezzled one string of coins will be tattooed on their faces and displayed in public. Those who embezzled 5 strings of coins will be exiled for 1,000 miles. Those who embezzled 10 strings of coins will be beheaded in public. Those who embezzled 20 strings of coins will be skinned and cut into grass. As for the punishment for embezzling 30 strings of coins, 50 strings of coins, and 100 strings of coins, you know in your heart. Think about it, as the servants of the Sun residence, how much money and grain have each of you embezzled from the master's family? Your whole family's life is not enough to pay for it. Your children, wives, parents, none of them can escape. In serious cases, you will be exterminated. Who gave you the courage to do such a thing? Are you bullying us because we are weak and can't control you, or do you think we are stupid and easy to bully?" When Sun Lan said these words full of killing intent, the housekeeper sat on the ground as if he was drained of his strength. The others were so scared that they forgot to cry and beg. They had received a lot of benefits from the housekeeper, and the money they embezzled was about 50 strings of coins to 100 strings of coins. Who knew that it would be so serious? The housekeeper suddenly came back to his senses and cried and begged, "I have really been blinded by lard. Please, Elder Langjun, for the sake of our past relationship, let me off this time. I will do my best to serve Elder Langjun in the future, and I will never dare to do such a thing again." Everyone wanted to live, and it was scary to think of the way to be beaten to death. Sun Lan looked at their reaction coldly, and suddenly thought of something. "Wait, keep it first." The housekeeper could not help but be overjoyed, but before he could rejoice, Sun Lan's words sent him back to hell. Chapter 1740. The amount of money the servants had embezzled was huge, and it was reasonable to say that they should be killed. However, according to the current laws, even if the servants had committed a crime, they could not be killed. They should inform the authorities to prevent future troubles. Of course, this was only for ordinary rich families. The gentry had a lot of privileges and had developed to the peak before the chaotic times. In addition, the laws were lax during the chaotic times, so they acted even more unscrupulously. If Sun Lan really killed these greedy servants who betrayed their master, outsiders wouldn't come and complain about what was wrong here. Therefore, Sun Lan subconsciously said something like beating them to death. But when the guards were about to drag them away, he suddenly realized that something was wrong. Grandfather was the Lord's important minister, and his reputation was the most important. Even if these servants asked for it, they still had to go through the procedure. Sun Lan remembered his grandfather saying that the Lord valued the law the most, so he probably wouldn't let them do as they pleased. If they accidentally hit the muzzle, it was hard to guarantee that they wouldn't become the target of the Lord's prestige. The other feudal vassals might give some face to the important ministers, but it was hard to say for his lord. Although Sun Lan was young, he wasn't a hothead, so he had more considerations. He waved his hand and said, "Tie all these people up. Kill anyone who dares to escape." The housekeeper immediately felt that his life had turned gray. Tears and snot flowed down his face as he wailed for mercy and played the emotional card. However, Sun Lan didn't even frown. This made everyone realize that the Sun Lan before them was no longer the innocent boy who was so soft and cute that he would be shy when he spoke. Although he hadn't reached the crown yet, he had a dignified manner that many adult men didn't have. He was only worried about one thing now. If he went to the authorities, this scandal in the family wouldn't be able to be hidden. However, fortunately he knew a few elders. If he secretly talked to them tomorrow, they should be able to settle this matter. He couldn't blame his grandfather for not being strict and lax in governing the family and ruining the old man's reputation, right? Because of this incident, Sun Lan's plan for the next day was completely disrupted. After he dealt with the greedy servants, beat the servants with dirty mouths, calculated the specific amount of embezzlement by the housekeeper and others, and redid the accounts, a day had passed. The nearby neighbors were all his grandfather's colleagues. Such a big matter in the mansion couldn't be completely hidden from their eyes and ears. Sun Lan planned to prepare some small gifts to pay a visit to the residents and build a good relationship. At the same time, she wanted them to keep this matter a secret so that no one would lose face. It was already the third day when he finished his work. When Sun Lan finally had some free time, she realized something that she had been wronged about. He didn't hide the news of his return. A few of his classmates who were close to him knew about it, but Jinghui didn't come. Could it be that Rong Li's jinx was right? Had Jinghui forgotten about her and taken a fancy to another flirtatious guy? Sun Lan felt uneasy, but she also knew that it was useless to hesitate. Only by taking the initiative would there be hope. He then specially prepared a generous gift to visit Qiguan's mansion. The reason was also ready-made. He had followed the army for 2 years and Qiguan Rang was equivalent to half a teacher to him. Qiguan Rang had benefited him a lot. Now that he was back, no matter what, he had to take care of Qiguan Rang's wife and the others on behalf of him. Seeing his teacher's wife, and at the same time, he could also see his childhood sweetheart whom he had been thinking about day and night. Wonderful, wonderful, beautiful. When she arrived at Qiguan's mansion, Sun Lan keenly noticed that the atmosphere in the mansion was not quite right. She subconsciously restrained the impetuous and joy in her heart. I haven't seen you for a few years. Auntie is more elegant than before. This is a little toy that I got by chance. I gave it to my younger brother to play with. Every son-in-law had to please the mother-in-law. If the father-in-law was too difficult to deal with, then he would take a roundabout way to deal with the mother-in-law. Qiguan Rang's wife was born in the Wei family of Hejian County. She was the eldest daughter of Lu Shi's teacher, Mr. Wei Yuan. After she married Qiguan Rang, the couple had a harmonious relationship. Even though they were not together for many years, this wife never had any complaints. Instead, she took care of the small house in good order. She was gentle and gentle. She was also very patient and loving in educating her children. Sun Lan lost his mother at a young age. She respected this wife very much. Facing her always felt like facing her own mother. This time, Sun Lan not only prepared a gift for the little fellow in the mansion, but he also prepared a generous gift for his future mother-in-law. Since you're already here, why are you giving me these empty gifts? Qiguan Rang's wife looked slightly haggard. Between her brows, there was still some worry that had not dissipated. However, she still cheered up and smiled at Sun Lan. Sun Lan was suspicious. However, he did not ask rashly. If Qiguan Rang's wife was worried about the mansion's private affairs, Sun Lan, as an outsider, would offend her by asking. The two chatted for a while. The content of the conversation was about how they had been all these years. Sun Lan took the opportunity to lead the topic to Qiguan Jingwei. Qiguan Rang's wife's raised lips stiffened. Her worry deepened. From this, it could be seen that Qiguan Rang's wife was mostly worried about Qiguan Jingwei. Sun Lan's heart skipped a beat. His right hand on his thigh suddenly tightened. He hurriedly asked, could it be that something happened to Jinghui? Qiguan Rang's wife wanted to say something but stopped. Sun Lan kept asking, and Qiguan Rang's wife finally told him the truth. Qiguan Jinghui had a conflict with someone in the academy. Her left hand was broken. The headmaster of the academy ordered her to reflect at home for a month. Sun Lan's heart skipped a beat when he heard this. Jinghui? Her left hand was broken? Who did it? Sun Lan's first reaction was to bring people to fight back. He even hit a girl. That bastard's whole family was asking for a beating, right? Qiguan Rang's wife was choked by Sun Lan's words. Shouldn't the normal reaction be to ask about the reason for the conflict? Listening to Sun Lan's words, he wanted to get back at her without distinguishing between right and wrong. Qiguan Rang's wife smiled bitterly. It's just a conflict between youngsters. Jinghui is also in the wrong. Lock her up for a month to learn a lesson. Sun Lan was extremely worried. He couldn't sit still when he heard that her hand was broken. Qiguan Rang's wife knew what he was thinking. She considerately gave him a way out and let Sun Lan go to the backyard to see Qiguan Jinghui. Because of Jiang? Jiang's efforts over the years had opened up the social atmosphere. The most typical point was that there weren't as many taboos between men and women as before. If it was in the past, Sun Lan wouldn't go to the backyard to see Qiguan Jingwei, who was recuperating and being locked up. Now it was fine. As long as it wasn't a man and a woman staying alone in a room for a long time, outsiders wouldn't say anything. Jingwei was Qiguan Rang's eldest daughter. Naturally, there was no shortage of maids and old women serving her. Sun Lan hurried to the courtyard where Qiguan Jingwei lived. When he got there, he saw Qiguan Jingwei in casual clothes sitting on the porch. Her left hand was hanging in front of her chest, and her right hand was rolling a book. Half of her body was leaning on the table. Her languid appearance was quite different from the one in his memory. Jingwei. His voice was filled with uncontrollable joy. Chapter 1741. Seeing this, Sun Lan would be a fool not to know that she was in a bad mood. Jingwei, I'm back. The maid brought a mat for Sun Lan, and Sun Lan sat down not far from Qiguan Jingwei. His eyes wandered back and forth between her face and left hand. You're back. Why are you so loud? The expected, holding hands and crying eyes, did not happen, and he was even hated. Are you angry with me? Sun Lan could not help but feel wronged. His voice was not loud. What did I do wrong? Qiguan Jingwei put the book in her hand aside and said casually, When was I angry with you? You still deny it? It's written all over your face. Qiguan Jingwei smiled coldly. Written all over your face? Then look again. Why am I angry? Sun Lan was speechless. How could he guess? If he guessed correctly, it would be fine. If he guessed incorrectly, he would die. After thinking about it, he did not do anything to provoke her. Unless, the foot warmer? Qiguan Jingwei said, You guessed correctly, but there's no reward. Sun Lan was not around. For the sake of her childhood friend, Qiguan Jingwei occasionally took care of the Sun residents. However, the servants' hearts had been raised wild. For example, the maidservant who warmed her feet had other thoughts. Every time Jing Hui came to visit, she would show some attitude that made Jing Hui extremely annoyed when she came to serve tea. Gradually, she was too lazy to go to the Sun residence. Yesterday, she heard some gossip in the Sun residence. How could she not be angry? Sun Lan breathed a sigh of relief and hurriedly explained, That girl has already been dealt with. I have nothing to do with such a careless girl. He was innocent. Look at his sincere eyes. Qiguan Jingwei said, What does it have to do with me whether you have anything to do with her or not? Although she said so, her face softened a little. Sun Lan had the courage to care about Qiguan Jingwei's left hand. Which bastard hit her? Qiguan Jingwei glanced at her left hand. Why don't you ask about the person I hit? Sun Lan did not seem to realize what was wrong. When he heard Mrs. Qiguan say that Jinghui's left hand was broken, he was so worried that he could not think of anything else. He subconsciously thought that Qiguan Jingwei was the weaker party and did not think about what happened to the person who hit her. What happened to that person? Sun Lan was a good boy. Since Jingwei asked him to ask, he asked. Qiguan Jingwei snorted. Her young brows carried a bit of coldness, which made Sun Lan feel very unfamiliar. How could I be at a disadvantage? I naturally broke the legs of that adulterous couple. Sun Lan was dumbfounded. Dog, couple? Did these words come from Jingwei's mouth? Jing Hui rolled her eyes and said, What kind of expression is that? An expression of disbelief, Sun Lan answered honestly. The cutie would evolve into a female insect or something that would be extremely cute. Jing Hui stretched out her long legs and found a more comfortable position. Sun Lan looked at her feet, which were covered in socks, and was afraid that she would catch a cold, so she took off her rabbit fur coat and covered her feet. Tell me what's going on? Qiguan Jingwei said, It's a long story. I have all the time in the world to tell you a long story. Qiguan Jingwei started talking, and Sun Lan also understood the cause and effect. Jing Hui said, The academy was established a few years ago. It was nothing when I was young, but when the students got older, their minds were not so pure. There was a classmate of mine who was 2 years older than me, and then, her studies declined a lot, and she got pregnant. Sun Lan was shocked. She's pregnant? Jing Hui nodded. Whose child is it? Jing Hui said, "It's the son of a small aristocratic family in the city, and the other party was also a student of the academy." Jing Hui said, "I also asked her why, and what did she say?" She said that she was born in a poor family, and now that she was of marriageable age, there were no elders in her family to take care of her marriage. She was worried that she would not be able to marry into a good family in the future, so she had to plan for herself. Coincidentally, a male student of the academy was interested in her, and after a while, they fell in love. The two of them, this shameless adulterous couple, actually did something improper in the academy and got pregnant. In the end, it was obvious that they couldn't hide it anymore, so they exploded. The headmaster was furious and expelled them. In order to prevent similar things from happening and tarnishing the reputation of the students and the academy, the teachers strictly forbade such things from happening. According to private investigations, many female students who were about to reach marriageable age or had already reached marriageable age had similar concerns. However, the scandal broke out in a timely manner, and they didn't dare to do anything even if they wanted to. Sun Lan didn't know what to say and could only continue listening to Jing Hui. "What do you think the ending of this story should be?" Sun Lan guessed, "An official marriage and everyone will be happy?" Jing Hui sneered and asked, "When you say this, do you believe it?" Sun Lan was speechless. All right, he didn't believe it himself. If it was in the past, the male student could take a female student as a concubine. After all, she was pregnant with the male student's child, and the other party had studied in the Golden Scale Academy for a few years. It was better than an illiterate concubine. However, now that the limelight was tight, who dared to take a concubine in public? The male student was only born in a small aristocratic family, and his ancestors' merits were not enough for him to take a concubine. If he couldn't take a concubine, could he marry her legally? That was even more impossible. That female student had an affair with him before marriage, got pregnant, and had a bad reputation. How could he marry her legally? It seemed like a beautiful campus love, but the reality was cruel. Either the female would be a nameless mistress and follow the male for the rest of her life, or the female would give birth to the male child, and the male would raise the child as a concubine. Or both the female and the child would get lost. The male student and his parents chose the third option. They despised the female for not having self-respect, seducing the man before marriage, being intimate with the man, and even getting pregnant, causing the man to be expelled from the academy. After 10 months of pregnancy, the female student regretted giving birth. She suffered a lot, and recalled her carefree life in the academy, regretting that she was too stupid to be cheated by the man. After giving birth, she took the child to the academy, and begged the headmaster to give her a chance to turn over a new leaf. But she didn't realize what she had done wrong, and every word she said was to excuse herself. For example, she said that she was of marriageable age, but her elders had long passed away, and no one in her hometown could arrange her marriage. If she took off her clothes for a few years, no one would want her, and if she couldn't marry into a good family, she would have no future, and so on. That was why she did something wrong in a moment of confusion. The female headmaster who taught the female class was infuriated by these theories. Jing Hui happened to be there, so she simply retorted. In the end, the female student kept talking about Jing Hui's family background, saying that her father was an important minister of the Lord, and she wouldn't have to worry about marriage in the future. For example, many people knew that Sun Lan liked Jing Hui, and the marriage was set in stone. Jing Hui could still be calm at first, but soon she couldn't calm down. Because the female student put Jing Hui in the same category as her, and her words were full of contempt and humiliation. Jing Hui couldn't stand it, so she retorted. If it were her previous self, she probably wouldn't have been able to scold them. But she went to study in the military camp. The academy had some cooperation with the stationed military camp. Every holiday, students would voluntarily sign up to go to the military camp to experience for a while. Many students didn't go because they thought it was too hard, and they were also ashamed to deal with these rude soldiers. But Qiguan Jingwei went every time. Staying in the military camp, she learned a lot of things. While her temperament changed, she also learned to scold people. She was vicious, fierce, and slippery. I came to the academy to study in order to show my talent in the future, not to accumulate capital for myself to serve men like you. Not to mention that I'm not engaged now. Even if I'm engaged and married, I can't stay in the backyard. It's fine if you can't bear it and do things lowly, but you have to implicate so many female students. How much sin have you committed? You don't know how to repent, and you still talk nonsense here. You don't even know what you've done wrong. Did I force you to do shameless things in a quiet place like the academy? Did I take off your clothes, open your legs, and make you pregnant? The Golden Scale Academy is a pure land. You don't cherish it, and you don't know how lucky you are. Then you should get out of here as soon as possible, and don't waste the quota. There are many women in the world who want to climb up. Someone like you who willingly degenerates should get out of here as soon as possible, and don't taint the peace here. Since the establishment of the female class in the Golden Scale Academy, how many rumors and social pressure had they endured? The masters endured the pressure, and they hoped that these students would work hard and correct the name of the female class. But in the end, they produced such trash. The female student was scolded by Jing Hui until her face turned green. She attacked out of anger. She learned a lot of skills in the academy, but she didn't use them to fight for justice against the man and his family. Instead, she used them to deal with Jing Hui. In terms of martial arts, Jing Hui couldn't beat them. However, she was popular in the class, had high prestige, and had many helpers. After a moment of chaos, the bones in Jing Hui's left hand were broken, and the female student's leg was broken. After that, Jing Hui still wasn't satisfied. She led more than 20 female students in the class, and brought their servants and guards to smash the house of the male student. Sun Lan asked, "You really smashed it?" Jing Hui sneered. "Why can't I smash it?" He played with the female students of the academy, and didn't take responsibility for making them pregnant. He ruined the reputation of hundreds of female students in several grades. It's already good enough that I only smashed their house. Doesn't he rely on his power? Then let him have a taste of being suppressed by a stronger power. Even if the sky falls, my father will bear it. Even if the Duke of Lanting finds out, he won't really blame me. Sun Lan was speechless. Jing Hui said, "This matter shouldn't be solved in private. Hiding it will damage the reputation of the female students of the academy. It's better to be high-profile, arrogant, and open for the world to see. In this way, they won't be able to talk about the innocence of the academy's students behind our backs." She did this to protect the female students of the academy. That girl's matter had brought too much damage to the female class of the academy. Those short-sighted people will only hold us back. If you expect them to give face to the female monitor, you might as well do it yourself. Jing Hui suddenly thought of something. She looked at Sun Lan with a scrutinizing gaze, which made the latter nervous for no reason. "Sun Lan, I'm here. You like me?" Yes. But I don't have any intention of overstepping my boundaries," Jing Hui said. "You like me and you want to marry me?" Sun Lan couldn't help but blush. She nodded and said yes. "Yes, but I have a condition." Sun Lan seemed to hear the sound of flowers blooming. That was the sound of her heart bursting with joy. "So, you agree just like that?" Chapter 1742. Yes, I agree just like that," Sun Lan added guiltily as if he was trying to regain his dignity. "Rong Li, I have no choice but to agree. You know Jing Hui's temperament. She always does what she says. I don't dare to take the risk." Feng Yi naturally did not pity his friend because Sun Lan agreed to a request. It was because Sun Lan was too timid in front of Jing Hui. With such a temperament, if he really married Qiguan Jing Hui in the future, he would be controlled by the other party and would never be able to make a comeback. Feng Yi was exasperated at his failure to live up to his expectations. How could a comrade who usually had his own opinions forget everything when he was in front of a little girl? Was his big head just for decoration? Sun Lan said timidly, "Anyway, it's not a matter of principle. If I agree, I agree." Qiguan Rang's father-in-law was too difficult to deal with. If he could use a promise to avoid his father-in-law and quickly clear the game, He felt that it was worth it. Besides, it was becoming more and more common for women to live alone. Sun Lan did not find it unacceptable. He suddenly thought of something and asked Feng Yi, "If Changxing made such a request to you, would you agree?" "Of course I would." Feng Yi subconsciously paused. After thinking, he said, "Naturally, we would discuss it." Sun Lan could not help but roll his eyes. He was already like this, and he was still scolding him. "I'm not talking about discussing it or not. I'm just asking for the result." Feng Yi said matter-of-factly, "After discussing it, if there is no room for negotiation, we will naturally agree." Could it be that he could abandon his future wife for something that was in the current situation? Just the thought of his childhood sweetheart marrying someone else in the future was unbearable. Sun Lan was speechless. Wasn't this the pot calling the kettle black? Was it interesting? Of course, Feng Yi was able to laugh. He and Changxing had negotiated and had a certain degree of leeway, unlike Sun Lan. Sun Lan was instantly terrified. He could foresee that if there was any conflict between Sun Lan and Jinghui in the future, the former would most likely give in first. This way, she would be completely dominated. After saying so much, what did Sun Lan promise Qiguan Jinghui? It could be said to be complicated, but it could also be said to be simple. To put it simply, it was for the householder. For the idle fish in the live broadcast room, the household head was just a name. The person who wrote on the first page of the household register had nothing to do with the interests of the couple. This was because the law stipulated that during the duration of the relationship between husband and wife, regardless of who was the head of the household, the rights enjoyed by the husband and wife were the same. For example, if one of the spouses wanted to dispose of their joint property, such as taking a loan or selling it, they would need the consent of the other spouse. Let's not talk about the actual implementation, at least there was such a saying. It was different in Sun Lan's era. The rights and obligations of the head of a household were slightly different from those of others. Qiguan Jinghui's request was naturally not to let Sun Lan enter her household registration. Sun Lan was her only child. Putting aside Sun Lan, even old Master Sun Wen would not agree to her request. Qiguan Jinghui didn't want to start a feud, so she naturally wouldn't make such a request. Her request to Sun Lan was to have an independent household registration. In other words, even if she married Sun Lan, she could still retain her status as the head of the household. Sun Lan agreed. Since the female soldiers were all like this, Jing Hui's request wasn't too much. However, Feng Yi felt that this young couple was a little wishful thinking. The difficulty of having two heads of household was not small. It might not succeed. In the current household registration, either a man was the head of the household or a woman was the head of the household. The latter specifically referred to those who came from the female battalion. In the future, after marriage, the man would enter the household. Note that it didn't matter if it was a man or a woman who was the head of the household. A family only had one head of the household. Sun Lan and Qiguan Jinghui wanted a household with two heads. The current household registration and the head of the household were not as simple as just writing a name. It also affected many aspects. The establishment of the household registration was not only to check the population, but also to levy taxes and assign labor. The contents recorded also included the number of men and women in each household, name, gender, date of birth, place of origin, identity, appearance, and even wealth. The head of the household had greater rights, but at the same time, they also shouldered heavier responsibilities. If two households were to be operated at the same time, the workload would be huge. In addition, the situation where a woman became the head of the household was not Jiang Yu's original creation. In fact, there were examples in the past, but there were certain conditions. Only when there were no men in the household could a female household be established. In other words, the woman would be the head of the household and enjoy more preferential treatment in taxes. If this woman died, it would be the end of the household. Feng Yi had to remind her little friend so that he would have a clear understanding of reality. For the time being, I don't know if the Lord's implementation of female households is a temporary measure or a long-term plan. However, to really implement it, the current laws must be changed drastically. Taxes are the foundation of a country. If it's peaceful times, not to mention a major change, even a small change would shake the interests of all parties and attract countless opposition. It would not be beneficial to the stability of the country. However, it's a chaotic world now. Even if it's a drastic change, no one would dare to object. These two young people slapped their heads and made a decision, completely disregarding the possibility of implementation. Feng Yi was not them. If the existence of female households is recognized on a large scale, but the preferential treatment for female households is not exempted, many people will definitely take advantage of this loophole. This is not beneficial to the country's taxes, so it can't be implemented on a large scale for a long time. If the preferential treatment for female households is abolished, the taxes will be too heavy for single women. In the future, there will be fewer and fewer female households that are willing to be independent. This is also contrary to the Lord's actions in recent years. If two households were to be operated at the same time, it would definitely make the household registration more complicated. The burden on the government would increase, and at the same time, it would mean that the collection of taxes would become complicated. There is no need to implement it. If it were to be implemented, it would definitely affect the whole body. It all depends on whether the Lord is willing or not. Feng Yi told them what she was worried about so that Sun Lan and Sun Lan could be mentally prepared. When Sun Lan heard this, he also calmed down. According to the current tax collection methods of the Xia dynasty and Dongqing, there was a close relationship between household registration, population, and land. If the population did not change, but the household registration increased and became complicated, it meant that the tax collection and labor would also become complicated. Then what should we do? Sun Lan frowned. He had already agreed to it. If it couldn't be implemented, how was he going to explain? If only he was to be the head of the household, Jingwei would not agree. If only Jingwei was to be the head of the household, his grandfather would not agree. If both of them were to be the head of the household, the government did not have such rules and regulations, most likely they would not agree as well. He just wanted to get married. Why did he have to face such a difficult problem? Changxing didn't give me this difficult problem. I don't have to worry about it. Feng Yi covered her face with her fan and smiled. You asked me, how would I know? Sun Lan was speechless. Chapter 1743. Rong Li, how can you bear to do this? Sun Lan looked at his good friend pitifully. They said that they would be together forever. Why did he kick him out of the car halfway? Feng Yi said, I really can't help you with this. Let me give you a suggestion. Write a letter to Old Man Sun or Military Counselor Qiguan. Seeing that his good friend wanted to smooth things over, Sun Lan had to show his trump card. He turned around and prepared to find Jingwei. Feng Yi raised his eyebrows. He subconsciously felt that Sun Lan was not that easy to deal with. He asked, Lan, where are you going? Find Jingwei. Let Jingwei talk to Changxing. If Changxing was also provoked into rebellion and asked the same question to Feng Yi, wouldn't Feng Yi become his brother in trouble? By then, he would like to see how Feng Yi would be able to stay out of trouble. Seeing that he was about to leave, Feng Yi hurriedly reached out and grabbed Sun Lan's hand. He said gloomily, Are you trying to die with me? Sun Lan stopped and smiled. Isn't a good brother supposed to share blessings and misfortunes together? It did not make sense for Sun Lan to be so worried about this matter, but Feng Yi was enjoying it. It was too unfair. Feng Yi was speechless. To hell with share blessings and misfortunes together. He did not expect Sun Lan, this thick-browed and big-eyed fellow, to have such a sinister intention. Rong Li, are you going to help me or not? Sun Lan stared at him with his bright and harmless eyes. Feng Yi scolded him in his heart. Sun Lan was different from Old Man Sunday. He was good at pretending to be weak. He was sure that Feng Yi could not do anything to him. I really owe you. Feng Yi sighed. After all, they were classmates and friends for many years. It was not his style to stand by and do nothing. As the saying goes, one would rather tear down 10 temples than ruin a marriage. Sun Lan had been thinking about Qiguan's eldest wife for many years. He could not let him be a single dog forever. Sun Lan smiled. Rong Li is indeed righteous. If not for his upbringing, Feng Yi really wanted to roll his eyes to express his inner feelings. What was righteousness? If it was not for Sun Lan, this shameless fellow, threatening him with both carrot and stick, he would not have gotten on this boat. Rong Li, tell me your idea. Feng Yi was the most outstanding youth of this generation, and Sun Lan had high hopes for him. He would definitely have a way. Method? He had to write a letter to his lord to find out what she was thinking. Otherwise, if we act on our own, your grandfather and my father won't be able to handle the consequences. Feng Yi said, although Jinghui only wants to retain her position as the head of the household and not be confined to the inner courtyard in the future, it seems to be a simple request with no problems, but it involves many things that we can't touch. We can't solve it. Sun Lan was speechless. He did not expect that the solution Feng Yi mentioned was to look for the elders. Previously, it was his grandfather. Now it was his lord. After all, he was the grandson that Old Man Sun had cultivated for many years. Sun Lan also had a sense for politics, but not as keen as Feng Yi. Testing the lord's intentions? Sun Lan said, if my lord intends to promote female households in the long run and support women, having two heads of household in a family might be the root of the problem. However, the implementation of two household heads would also involve issues such as taxation and population inspection. Only by solving the problem at the root could everything be achieved. If my lord is willing, our questions will definitely receive a response. On the other hand, if my lord doesn't make a statement, it means that there will be other changes to the female households. It could be further improvements, or it could be a temporary solution. Feng Yi nodded and said, we still need my lord to make a statement on this matter so that we can think of a solution. Otherwise, it will be a waste of effort. If the lord didn't have this intention, it would be useless even if the two of them were to be passionate. Sun Lan asked uncertainly, Rong Li, what do you think are the chances of this happening? Feng Yi covered her face with her fan, revealing only her eyes, which were brimming with a meaningful smile. Our lord is a woman after all. If she doesn't change the world's view of heirs, when she has children in the future, it will be a man's family line. Doesn't that mean that her 10 years of conquest will be a wedding dress for the young master's father? Feng Yi saw through everything. Sun Lan was stunned. For the first time, he realized that his good friend was Feng Zhen's biological son. People live for money, fame, status, or power. At the end of the day, it's still for themselves. Why do people care so much about the family line? Of course, it's not just so that there will be descendants to worship after death. Only the dead know what the world after death is like. The living don't know. Another important reason is to pass on the torch. The fruits of a lifetime of hard work would naturally be passed on to her own children. There were also differences between close and distant children, like the palm and the back of the hand. If the world thought that male heirs would continue the family line of the man, then everything the Lord had in the future would be passed on to the male heirs. In the eyes of the world, wouldn't it be a wedding dress for someone else? Even if the children were her own, she still wouldn't feel good about it. Sun Lan said, my lord is not such a fool. How could her thinking be so narrow-minded? Feng Yi sighed and said, why are you scolding yourself? Sun Lan choked and suddenly thought of something. Her face turned green. Feng Yi said, this is not the thinking of a fool. It's just the thinking of an ordinary person. It's not narrow-minded. If you only have one daughter in the future and she is destined to marry into someone else's household, then what you have worked so hard for half your life will be taken by your son-in-law through your daughter. Will you feel good? On the other hand, if your daughter is independent and continues the family line, you will feel better after 100 years. Everyone liked to take advantage of others and not be taken advantage of. However, how could the concept of inheritance that had lasted for thousands of years be reversed so easily? Sun Lan said, so, the possibility of my lord agreeing is very high? Feng Yi smiled and said, we will know the result only after we find out. His analysis was probably feasible for ordinary people, but it was not quite right for Jiang Pengji. Even if the result was the same, the analysis process was very different. Because Sun Lan had spoken too confidently, he was a little flustered. He did not dare to look at Jing Hui for fear that she would be disappointed in him. Little did he know, his reaction was within her expectations. Because of their father's generation, Changxing and Jing Hui were considered bosom buddies. They were very close. It did not take long for her to hear about Jing Hui making things difficult for Sun Lan. She said, "I think this matter is not easy to handle. You are deliberately making things difficult for him." As a student trained by the powerful teachers of the Golden Scale Academy, Jing Hui and Changxing's innate genes were powerful. Naturally, she would not be bad. She was also clear about the obstacles that would be encountered in implementing a family with 2 households. "Of course I know it's not easy, but it's also good to let him know that it's not so easy to marry me. The daughter of the Qiguan family is not an ordinary woman in the inner house. If he dares to marry me, he should be mentally prepared. Otherwise, we will quarrel over this in the future. It's better to make it clear from the beginning." Changxing chewed on the peanut cake and her eyes could not help but turn. In the distance, Feng Yi was together with Sun Lan, thinking about how to write a memorial to Jiang Pingji. He suddenly shivered. He had an ominous feeling. Chapter 1744. To be honest, this was the first time Feng Yi and Jiang Shangrong wrote a memorial to the Lord. They deliberated over every word and sentence, trying to use the simplest language to explain the matter clearly. For this, the 2 top students of the Golden Scale Academy stayed up all night. They wrote a thick stack of useless drafts, but they could not finalize it. It was not that they had obsessive-compulsive disorder of perfection, nor was it that they did not have enough knowledge. It was just that the more they wrote about it, the more difficult it was for them. However, they had to bite the bullet and write it. That was why they hesitated and wasted a lot of manuscripts. From dusk till dawn, the 2 of them discussed for several hours before finally finalizing the draft. "I was wondering why my head was a little dizzy. It's already the 2nd day." Sun Lan walked to the window and opened it. The golden morning light poured through the gap and shrouded them, as if they were wearing a thin layer of golden gauze. Feng Yi's eyes were used to the darkness and candlelight. Suddenly being shown by the cold but exceptionally bright morning light, his sore eyeballs could not help but protest. He subconsciously raised his hand to cover his eyes to block the morning light. Only then did he feel much better. "It's getting late. I'll ask someone to prepare warm water to wash up." After washing up, he would catch up on his sleep lest he suddenly died from cultivating all night. Feng Yi slowly got up from the mat. Although he was careful, his mind was a little muddled. His feet were so soft as if he was stepping on cotton. Before he ordered, the servant informed him that the eldest lady of the Feng family and the eldest lady of the Qiguan family had come to visit. "Why is Jinghui here?" Changxing was understandable because the 2 families lived very close to each other. Changxing liked to visit Feng Yi to play since he was young. However, Jinghui could not understand. The relationship between the 2 families was not that close. She came to visit early in the morning. Thinking of this, his slow brain finally thought of someone. Feng Yi turned his gaze to Sun Lan, who was immersed in cultivating. Her reaction was even slower than his. She was still in a state of confusion. He thought that he knew the main reason why Qiguan Jinghui suddenly came to visit. Wash your face. Don't go out to meet people with an oily face and dull eyes. Even though they were so familiar with each other, the young man still did not want the woman to see his oily face and unwashed eye sores. Even if these two were handsome young men, which young man who could make a young girl yearn for love hadn't been carefully groomed? Brother Rongli, I'm here to find you. Cheerful voices drifted into the room, dispersing the originally heavy atmosphere, as if injecting vitality into the air. By the time Changsheng and Lu Ta arrived, Feng Yi and the others had already been served by the servants to wash their faces with warm water. When the warm and steamy towels touched their faces, they quivered and their muddled minds became slightly clearer. She carefully brushed her teeth twice with dental powder, rinsed her mouth with warm water, combed her long hair again, and put on the accessories on her waist. Not long after, there were two fresh and refreshing young men. Why are you here so early? Feng Yi only came out to meet him after she was done tidying up. have you had breakfast? Changxing said, not yet. Feng Yi took the opportunity to say, then let's have breakfast together before we talk about anything else. Brother Rongli, look at the dark circles under your and Lan's eyes. You were so worried that you didn't sleep last night? Changxing smiled and squinted her eyes. Her smiling eyes glanced at the dark circles under their eyes, and then looked at their low spirits. She immediately guessed that these two companions had been cultivating for an entire night. However, the gloating in her words was too obvious. Feng Yi knocked on her head. Great, the two of you came all the way here just to see how pathetic the two of us are? Changxing smiled and said, this is just along the way. I originally wanted to imitate Sister Jinghui and give Brother Rongli a difficult problem. Feng Yi's smile froze. Now, when he heard the word difficult, he was a little afraid. If Qiguan Jinghui did not set a good example for Changxing, how could she teach bad people? Without waiting for him to say anything, Changxing used a handkerchief to gently stroke the dark circles under his eyes and said with distress, after seeing you, I can't bear to do it. Although he didn't say any warm words, those few simple words made Feng Yi feel warm. Look, Changxing was the cute one. Qiguan Jinghui was the Rakshasa wearing a cute fake skin. Sun Lan looked at the two showing off their affection as if there was no one else around. He faintly had the illusion that his stomach was bloated. He was not a fool. If he did not show his misery to gain sympathy at this time, then when would he do it? After the four of them had breakfast, Changxing asked, how does Lan plan to solve the problem raised by Sister Jinghui? Sun Lan took out a few pieces of paper from his sleeve. He was a little perturbed. This was the answer sheet that he and his companions wrote after staying up all night cultivating. Qiguan Jinghui did not really force him. She was just making things difficult for him. It did not matter if Sun Lan could not achieve it, as long as he had the intention. Seeing that Sun Lan really took out the answer sheet, she was a little curious and wanted to take a look. She did not know how many points the two scholars in front of her could produce after a night of painstaking effort. Changxing also came over to take a look. The two were originally smiling, but the more they read, the more serious their gazes became. At the end, Changxing said, no. Jinghui folded the few pieces of paper neatly and said, I don't agree either. The Golden Scale Academy taught everything. The teachers paid more attention to the combination of teaching materials and practical matters. The higher the grade, the closer the content was to the real situation. Jinghui and Changxing were not in the same grade, but their grades were among the best in the Golden Scale Academy. They were taught by the great scholars in school, and at home, they had their families to give them special attention. It was understandable that they were not excellent. Changxing was born in the Feng family. Her grandfather, Feng Ren, was one of the big shots in the Golden Scale Academy. It was too easy for her to give them special attention. Qiguan Jinghui's grandfather was the great scholar in Hejian, Wei Yuan. Old Master Wei Yuan also moved here to retire, and he could teach his granddaughter at the same time. Even though the two had not really finished their apprenticeship, their political sense was not inferior to Feng Yi's. Because of their family background, they were even more sensitive. After reading the contents of the booklet, they knew what made Feng Yi and the others stay up all night. The more they read, the more frightened they were, so they immediately rejected it. Do you know what will happen to you if the contents of the booklet are leaked? Changxing showed a rare solemn expression. This booklet involves the interests of too many people. Those whose interests are at stake can't touch Duke Lanting, but it's easy for them to touch you. It was not as simple as having two heads of household. There were also suggestions for tax changes. When it comes to taxes, once it started, it can't be stopped. Just by looking at the first few suggestions for changes, Changxing knew that if this thing was leaked, it would bring disaster to Sun Lan and the others. Even if they had the protection of their elders, as long as there was such a stain, their future career would be in jeopardy. Jinghui also regretted it. If she had known that Sun Lan would have this idea, she would not have used this to make things difficult for them. It would have been better to use a gentle method to have a good conversation. She knew Sun Lan's temperament, so Qiguan Jinghui was not worried that she would waste her life in the backyard like other women. Chapter 1745. Sun Lan said, I've discussed it with Wang Lin. This matter involves a lot of people. It's not convenient to do it openly, so we can only do it secretly. If it was done openly, there would be many people who would come into contact with this booklet. The news could not be hidden. If it was in the form of a secret booklet, the contents could only be seen by the trusted ministers and the Lord. Compared to the former, the latter was much more confidential. Changxing couldn't help but frown. If it's just for Sister Jingwei's test, you don't have to do this. If it was not good enough, they would make countless enemies, but they might lose their lives. Feng Yi said, at first it was because of this. But after the secret booklet was written, I realized the meaning was more than that. Changxing was a little anxious, but she still restrained herself and listened to Feng Yi's explanation. Feng Yi said, I remember, before Lan and I followed the army, the topic of the last lesson taught by the headmaster of the academy was the cause of troubled times. The headmaster asked us to explore the root cause of troubled times. If I remember correctly, the headmaster even compiled it into a book. Changxing nodded. She was also a senior student, and the content of her studies was more relevant to current politics. She had also taken similar courses. Feng Yi continued, I remember that many of my classmates said that the royal family was greedy for the desolate silver, and that it was their fault that caused the world to be in chaos. Some said that the officials were in cahoots with each other, causing the common people to suffer. Some even said that natural and man-made disasters occurred frequently, causing the common people to turn into mobs. Dongqing was like this, Nanxing was like this, but is the answer to this question so shallow and simple? Changxing said, of course not. These are only part of the reason, but not the main reason. Coincidentally, Changxing had taken the same course a while ago. She asked her grandfather for special tutoring and learned a lot from this wise old man. What caused a country's destruction could not be a local factor, but something related to the whole. Feng Yi said, I think so too. After entering the military camp, I consulted a few military counselors and had a different opinion. Military counselor Qiguan once mentioned the problem of the national treasury in the last years of Dongqing. The royal family's desire for grandiose achievements and misappropriation of military supplies was a problem, but it could not hide the fact that the national treasury's revenue had been decreasing year after year. This money was not enough to satisfy the royal family's extravagance. How could there be extra money to equip the military supplies? The problem was, according to the most recent census, before Dongqing was destroyed, the population did not decrease but increased. However, the tax revenue of the national treasury did not increase but decreased. Which part of this place was the problem? Just because someone embezzled tax money and filled their own pockets? How could it be so simple? Changxing said, Brother Rongli, it's not that we haven't thought about it, but no one dares to make a move. Changxing had naturally thought about what Feng Yi said. Under her grandfather's guidance, she also analyzed a lot of the content. Even if his understanding wasn't as deep as Feng Yi's, his general direction was correct. Because the 5 kingdoms were all split from the great Xia dynasty, the tax and labor system of each kingdom was similar, only the details were different. The so-called tax was levied on the land, while the labor was levied on the heads of people. It could be material objects or manpower. For example, Dongqing's tax and corvée system was rather complicated. On the whole, it still followed the template of the Xia dynasty. Not only were there many programs for young adults to serve, but they were also very strict. If they didn't want to serve, they had to pay a certain amount of money and rations according to the number of people. Even if they didn't want to serve, they still had to pay a certain amount of tax. There weren't that many types of taxes, but it was still very deceptive. The land tax was based on a certain percentage of the average output of the occupied land. What did it mean to occupy land? The average area of the land occupied by a family. For example, Father Ma had 1 billion yuan, and poor A had 0 yuan. The average savings of the two were 500 million yuan. It was even easier to understand the percentage of the output per mu. The government would take 50% of the output per mu. This percentage was considered low. There was a period of time when the percentage was even up to 80%. In other words, The government would take 50% to 80% of the harvest of a farmer's hard work for a year. The remaining 20% would be given to the people. This 20% had to be deducted from the family's head tax and other miscellaneous taxes. This little amount of rice was not even enough to fill their stomachs, not to mention handing it over to the government to exempt them from the heavy labor. If the labor was levied on your family, then you had to obediently hand over the people. Of course, these indicators were for ordinary people and aristocrats who had special privileges. They could reduce taxes and be exempted from the labor. A little bit of it could be dealt with. In the early days of the founding of Dongqing, ordinary people did have a lot of fertile land in their hands. The occupied land was not too excessive. However, natural and man-made disasters could not be predicted by human beings. Many lands were resold to the aristocrats at a low price by the people. The aristocrats and other higher-ups obtained more land from the people to achieve the goal of annexation. The land in the hands of the people became less and less, but the taxes collected based on the occupied land did not decrease. In layman's terms, the income was low, but the taxes paid were not low. This meant that the people received less money. As time went by, the people could not bear the burden. More and more people sold themselves to the aristocrats as serfs or farm laborers to fight for a living. After the land annexation, the aristocrats had more and more land in their hands. However, as a privileged class, the actual number of land they owned was much larger than the theoretical occupied land. This meant that the more land they had, the more tax-free land they could get, and the higher their income. Not only that, but the aristocrats could also use their privileges to reduce taxes that were already low. The poor people became poorer, and the rich aristocrats became richer. The number of people who paid taxes decreased, and the number of aristocrats who paid taxes did not increase. The overall revenue of the national treasury naturally decreased. In addition to the embezzlement of taxes by various local governments, it would be strange for the national treasury to have a high revenue. There was no money in the national treasury. It was so poor that it could not even pay the salaries of the officials. The country was doomed. The situation in Dongqing was not that bad, but the royal family was too extravagant. They dug their own graves. Changsheng remembered the words of the academy's master, Master Cheng Jing. Taxes were the foundation of a country. Those hypocrites who said that money was like dung should go eat dung. Not to mention the distant past, just the rise and fall of the dynasties of a few countries in recent times showed the importance of the national treasury's taxes. If this was to be changed, the conflict between Jiang Pingji and the aristocrats would become more intense. Whether the east wind prevailed over the west wind, or the west wind prevailed over the east wind, the bastard who proposed the tax reform would be dragged out to be sacrificed to the heavens. Changsheng looked at Feng Yi, her eyes full of struggle. "Don't worry, I know what I'm doing." Feng Yi knew that Changsheng was worried, so she said gently, "My lord will not be unaware of the stakes. She is also an elder who watched me grow up. If she really wants to punish someone, she will not punish me and Lan, who are still wet behind the ears." To put it bluntly, he and Sun Lan were still not enough. If there was really a reform, it would most likely be to plot against some unlucky aristocrats and use their entire family to sacrifice to the heavens. Chapter 1746. Feng Zhen could never have imagined that his well-behaved and precious son would unexpectedly dig such a big hole for him at such a critical moment. At the moment he was still on the road. From Nanxing's Ningzhou to Dongqing's Wanzhou, the two places were very far apart. Feng Zhen and his group had been on the road for more than a month, and their bones were about to break from the bumpy ride. In addition to the fatigue from the long journey, Feng Zhen was also not used to the temperature in the north and south. Nanxing's cold was cold and damp, so cold that it made one's bones shiver. Dongqing's cold in winter was an overwhelming snowstorm, so one had to be fully armed just to go out. When they arrived in Wanzhou, it was less than a month before New Year's Eve. Most people were cooped up at home for the winter, so there were very few people on the road. It was freezing outside, but inside the carriage, it was warm and cozy. Inside the carriage, the two scholars, Feng Zhen and Qian Su, were fully armed. They wore brocade hats and marten coats, and carried warm hand warmers in their arms. Xianxia was a southerner who grew up in a warm and watery place. When had he ever seen such heavy snow in the north? At first, he was a little excited, but after a while, the novelty faded, leaving only worry for the people in his heart. The snow is so thick, I don't know how the people will survive this winter. Although it was said that snow meant a good harvest, if the snow was too heavy, it would be a snow disaster. The quality of the people's houses was not good, so every winter, countless houses would collapse under the weight of the snow. Without shelter from the wind and rain, how would they survive such a cold winter? Qiansu's brows were dyed with worry. On the other hand, Feng Zhen was in a good mood the whole way, even having the mood to warm up his wine and drink until his cheeks were flushed. In the end, he couldn't stand it anymore, so he explained a little and comforted Qiansu. Didn't you notice that along the way, we didn't see a single corpse on the road? They didn't even see many living people, let alone corpses frozen to death outside. The snow on the official road, however, was swept clean. Feng Zhen flattered his lord and said with a smile, "My lord is lenient and treats the people very well. How could you let them not survive winter? This year's snow wasn't too heavy, and the people already have a plan to deal with it. Even if the houses that the commoners live in are crushed by the snow, the government will arrange for them to take refuge. They will only return after the houses are repaired. They won't let anything happen to them." Feng Zhen smiled and said, "You'll know once you enter the city." Actually, even without entering the city, Qiansu knew that her worries were unnecessary. After entering Wanzhou, Qiansu discovered a very strange phenomenon. There were always villages near the official roads, and the houses in these villages were all neat and tidy, as if they were twins from a mother's womb. One had to know that the houses in the villages of the commoners were built in all sorts of styles. Not only were they ugly and of poor quality, but their locations were also messy. However, these villages were different. They were neat and tidy, and it was comfortable to look at them. Not only that, but he also saw people climbing up to the roofs to clear the snow. The distance was a little far, so he couldn't see the appearance of the commoners clearly. However, he could see that they were wearing thick clothing that was enough to ward off the cold. Feng Zhen explained to him, the villages near the official roads were all built by the government after they recruited refugees. Most of the commoners are refugees, and some of them are people from deep in the mountains. The government made the decision to move them down from the mountains. They were built near the official roads to make it easier for them to transport grain. With the official roads extending in all directions, the commoners could transport the agricultural products that they had accumulated at home to other places to sell. This place wasn't far from the mountains, and there were farmlands that the commoners could cultivate and be self-sufficient here. Of course, the maintenance of the official roads was also undertaken by these villages in turn. For example, when there was snow in winter, each village would be responsible for clearing a section of the road. After the winter, the government would allocate a certain amount of money, grain, or various kinds of spring planting to the commoners in these villages. Qiansu said, "It's hard to leave their homeland. Would they be willing to leave the place where their ancestors have lived for generations?" At first, there were indeed some commoners who weren't willing. They even suspected that there was some conspiracy behind it, Feng Zhen said with a smile. Dongqing has also experienced many years of war, and the commoners have suffered greatly. The government moved them, changed their houses, gifted them with fertile land, spring planting, farm tools, and cattle. Who would really cling to their old place and refuse to move? As long as some people in a village become rich, the others will be moved no matter how stubborn they are. Our Lord has a kind heart, and these commoners aren't ungrateful. Apart from a few trusted subordinates, no one knew of Jiangyu. Ji was playing a big game of chess. After hearing this, Qiansu agreed with Feng Zhen's explanation. Ji was indeed a kind and wise ruler. He had expended so much manpower, resources, and money just to let the commoners live a good life and live in good houses. It was truly rare. Many feudal lords only knew how to develop themselves and squeeze more capital from the commoners to fight for the world. It was rare to see a feudal lord who was willing to sacrifice his own interests to benefit the commoners. The more Qiansu understood Ji, the more she felt ashamed of her past self. Prejudice was really unbearable. After hearing Qiansu's words, Fengzhen smiled but didn't say anything. Jiangyu? It was true that Ji was benefiting the commoners, but this construction plan wasn't just for the commoners. Because of the chaotic times, many commoners couldn't register for household registration at birth. They were considered unregistered residents, and without a household registration, there was no way to conduct a census. Without accurate population statistics, how would tax laws be enforced in the future? Moving the commoners to a fixed village, counting the population and arranging household registration was not only for the benefit of the commoners, but also for unified management of the commoners and to ensure social security. These houses weren't given away. They were still rented to the commoners at a low price to encourage the commoners to produce and create value. Then, they would buy the permanent residency rights of the houses from the government. This was an invisible demographic dividend. In Wanzhou, such villages could be found everywhere. These villages were all built around arable land and roads built by the government. There were at least 40 to 50 households in a village, and at most 100 households in a village. Of course, these constructions weren't completed overnight. Basically, every village had to be repaired and a group of people moved in. At first, the commoners weren't very willing. Later, they all stretched their necks and hoped that it would be their turn. The wheels of the cart continued to roll forward. Before long, they saw the tall and majestic elephant Sunday. It wasn't very fitting to say that it was a county. The permanent population here was even greater than that of the largest state capital, and the city was constantly expanding. Of course, these expansions had their own rules and regulations. After entering the city and seeing the neat and tidy houses in the city, Qiansu once again fell silent. If he knew that there was a word in this world called obsessive-compulsive disorder, he would probably understand how he felt. Whether it was village construction or city construction, was the person in charge's obsessive-compulsive disorder at an incurable late stage. The houses had to be neat and uniform, and the decorations on the eaves had to be exactly the same. There couldn't be a single difference in the architectural specifications. Even the green bricks on the ground had to follow a certain pattern. Because Jiang Ji had recommended the method of making green bricks at the Huangshui conference, many of the feudal vassals had gone back and started to work on it. However, they had ended up in a mess, and the green bricks weren't very beautiful and neat. But Elephant's son was different. Chapter 1747. Qiansu's idea wasn't unreasonable. Xiangyang had a set of strict rules and regulations. Even an illiterate person could understand them. The people were illiterate, but after living there for almost a decade, these rules had long been ingrained in their bones, forming a special spiritual outlook. After Qiansu entered the city, she felt like she had accidentally entered a paradise. The layout of Xiangyang was different from other cities. People had their own roads and carriages had their own roads. Therefore, the roads here were exceptionally wide, enough for 5 carriages to travel side by side. Every 500 steps, there was a wooden barrel that was half the height of a person standing on the side of the road. From time to time, people would throw something into it. The streets were spacious, clean, and orderly. It made Qiansu, a nouveau riche, feel indescribably uneasy. The feeling of uneasiness was similar to that of an illiterate person sneaking into the circle of top scholars. Fengzhen revealed a long-lost emotion and explained to Qiansu excitedly. What are those wooden barrels used for? They're used to throw rubbish and the filth of cows and horses. They're not allowed on the road. If you don't dispose of them, you'll be fined if you're caught. What's up with those strange carriages? Qiansu saw a carriage with 2 horses passing by next door. Except for the top of the carriage, it was open on all sides. Qiansu took a look and discovered that the carriage was separated by 3 wooden planks. There were 6 bearded stools, and 6 fairly clean-dressed ordinary people were sitting inside. Fengzhen took a look and said, "It's a public carriage from the Carriage and Horses Company." According to the ancient system, 1 carriage for the commoners, 2 for the scholars, 3 for the officials, 4 for the officials, 5 for the feudal lords, and 6 for the emperor. Qian Su's brows furrowed. She said unhappily, judging by their attire, they're obviously commoners. How are they qualified? That's true, but one horse can't pull 6 people, Fengzhen said. At first, there were indeed scholars who objected, but with the Lord's personality, she's always amenable to coaxing but not coercion. The carriage and horses company is also beneficial to the people. What's wrong with 2 horses? Xiangyang was getting bigger and bigger. There were more and more people living here. The north, south, east, and west were separated by a long distance. In order to accommodate the old war horses, Jiang Pingji set up a carriage and horses company. She let the horses pull the carriages. The drivers were all retired soldiers. Transportation was convenient, and the people didn't have to walk. One only needed to pay a certain fee to get on the bus. Ordinary families could afford it. Because 2 horses pulling a chariot was a privilege that only scholars had, ordinary civilian organizations did not dare to follow the trend of setting up chariots and horses for fear of being accused of overstepping their authority. Therefore, chariots and horses had always been an official organization. In order to make it easier to manage, he also made a license plate mark. Due to the high cost, horse-drawn carriages and ox carts were not as popular as private cars in the later generations, so the traffic had always been smooth. Commoners could wait for a bus at a fixed stop. If there was an empty bus, they could get on. The funny thing was that the people who had objected to it at first were happy to use the public carriages later on. It couldn't be helped. Not everyone had the money to keep a horse carriage or an ox cart. Most of the time, they had to rely on their feet. Since there was such a convenient means of transportation that even the commoners could use, why couldn't they? Qian Su watched with relish. She was shocked at first, but then she calmed down. However, she didn't close her mouth halfway through. "We're here." Fengzhen got out of the carriage and secretly massaged his old waist. Then, as if nothing had happened, he walked over to the other carriage. "Madams, you can come down with the little Langjun and the little wife." The curtains of the carriage were lifted. Yan Shuxian and Yang Rujia stepped down from the carriage with the help of their maids. They were holding their babies tightly wrapped in their arms. Fengzhen had applied to Jiang Pingji for a transfer to Wanzhou. It was official business, but in fact he was slacking off. Jiang Pingji couldn't bear to see him so happy, so she assigned him the task of escorting Yang Tao and Yan Lin's wife. Yang Tao and Yan Lin both had families, but the conditions in Nanxing were harsh and unsuitable for their wives and children. Jiang Pingji suggested that their wives and children move to Wanzhou to settle down. Jiang Pingji was purely concerned about her subordinates, but in the ears of Yang Tao and Yan Lin, it sounded like a threat. Was she suggesting that they hand over the hostages? Regardless of whether she meant it or not, Yang Tao and Yan Lin could only agree. This trivial matter was thrown to Fengzhen. Qian Su volunteered to help. Although it was said that she was sharing Fengzhen's worries, she was actually secretly protecting the 2 madams and their children to prevent possible harm. As intelligent as Jiang Pingji was, she naturally understood the deeper meaning behind these people's actions. She didn't explain and let them fill in the blanks. This was a comedy where everyone was diligently scheming against each other, but only the Lord was fishing in troubled waters. "We'll be living here from now on? Where will Rujia live?" Yan Shuxian had been a little uneasy these days. When she saw the residence she would be living in from now on, she was a little uncertain. "Isn't this treatment a little too good? General Yang and military advisor Yen have a close relationship. My lord wants to arrange for them to live closer together. I checked the houses that are still empty. This is the only one that's better. The location is quiet, but it's not far from the bustling city. This is General Yang's residence, and the one opposite is military advisor Yan's." As a building maniac, his lord had built hundreds of residences in one go as soon as she entered Xiangyang district. A small number of residences were left behind. Some were given to the initial team as rewards, and the rest were sold at a high price to the gentry or local tycoons who had moved in. His lord, a black-hearted merchant, paired up with Wei Ci, the leader of the navy. The residences there were extremely expensive. In the past 2 years, they had earned a lot just by selling the residences. For example, Feng Zhen's residence, which he had bought for only 3 copper coins, had now increased in value countless times over. If Yang Tao and the rest knew that his lord had gifted them such a residence, they would be even more loyal. "Thank you, Master Lanting." Yan Shuxian secretly heaved a sigh of relief. She bowed toward the south and nodded to Feng Zhen to express her thanks. Feng Zhen smiled and said, "It's New Year's Eve Lantern Festival in a while. If the 2 madams are free, you can bring your maidservants out to play and relax." In reality, Xiangyang district was very lively for a month before New Year's Eve. Various merchants' warm-up activities were similar to those of profiteers in later generations. These scenes could only be seen in Xiangyang district. For outsiders like Yan Shuxian, it was rather rare. Feng Zhen only returned home after settling them down. Little did he know that his son's rebellious youth had arrived. The scene was rather peculiar. Thinking about how he bragged about his son in front of his colleagues and how good he was at educating his son, he couldn't help but hammer himself to death. "Silly boy, you've tricked your father to death." Feng Yi's secret letter successfully reached its destination and landed in Jiang Pingji's hands. The reason why it was a secret letter was that its confidentiality was the most important. The number of people who were qualified to read the contents of the letter was definitely less than 3. Feng Yi and the other naughty boys were quite lucky. The secret letter landed directly in Jiang Pingji's hands. "Feng? It's from Rong Li of Feng Zhen's family. Could it be that something happened at Zhanjiang Pass?" Jiang Pingji still didn't know that Feng Yi and Sun Lan had returned to the academy to continue their studies. She thought that the 2 of them were still working hard at the front lines. She tore open the seal and took out the thick secret letter. At that moment, the sun was setting in the west. The room was dim and half of Jiang Pingji's face was hidden in the darkness. Chapter 1748. Madam, bad news. Master suddenly said that he wants to punish her. When the old housekeeper hurried over to ask Wan Xiu for help, Wan Xiu was in the middle of her skin treatment. Punish her? Hearing this, Wan Xiu frowned slightly. Was there such a thing in the house? No, the point was why and who was being punished. Wan Xiu hurriedly got up from the mat and followed the housekeeper to save her without makeup. Why did Master suddenly want to punish her? Who did something wrong? What did he do wrong? Although she asked, she was smart and had a rough guess in her heart. There were only 3 proper masters in Feng Zhen's residence. Feng Zhen wouldn't ask for the family law to punish him, so the only one left was Feng Yi. However, Feng Yi had always been a well-behaved child, so how could she have angered Feng Zhen to the point of asking for the family law? The old housekeeper had served Feng Zhen for many years. As a servant, he wouldn't interfere with Feng Zhen's education without permission. The fact that he came to her in such a hurry showed that this matter was unusual. Wan Xiu frowned and walked like the wind. She couldn't care less about her appearance. The old housekeeper said with a pale face, "I don't know what happened either. I only know that eldest Lang Jun said something to Master." Master suddenly flew into a rage. Not only did he want to punish eldest Lang Jun, but he also said that he would personally whip eldest Lang Jun to prevent him from causing trouble again. Wan Xiu was shocked. "'Cause a great calamity? This crime could have been committed on anyone, but he had watched Rong Li grow up. As his father, how could he not know Rong Li's temperament? He didn't ask for the reason and said such harsh words without distinguishing between right and wrong. Is Ziji crazy? Wan Xiu's words were reasonable and resonated with the old housekeeper. Indeed, eldest Lang Jun was a good seedling that everyone had watched grow up. These days, he had been studying hard, going to school, and working hard. He did not have the slightest air of a playboy. He had also kept himself clean and never fooled around with those wastrels. His peers were already in the brothels of New Lu, but eldest Lang Jun didn't even have a maid to serve him. If he didn't whore, gamble, or drink, where else could he find such a worry-free son of an official? The old housekeeper was also puzzled. He subconsciously ignored his wife's unceremonious scolding of "Zi Feng is crazy." In his heart, Feng Zhen deserved to be scolded. When Wan Xiu brought her people over, she heard Feng Zhen's angry curses from afar. "Unfilial son, are you trying to anger your father to death? Look at what you've done. How dare you do something that will bring disaster to your entire family?" Feng Zhen heard the commotion and thought that the old housekeeper had called for the family discipline. "Hand it over. See if I don't break this unfilial son's legs." Wan Xiu stepped forward and said, "What do you mean by breaking my legs? Let me see who dares to make a move." Feng Zhen, who was standing, and Feng Yi, who was kneeling with his head lowered, looked at her in unison. The latter's gaze was calm, while the former's anger had yet to subside. "This has nothing to do with you." Feng Zhen was so angry that his blood was racing. His whole body was covered in hot sweat, and his words were a little harsh. "Go back first. You hit my son. What do you mean by, 'this has nothing to do with me'?" Wan Xiu stood in front of Feng Yi, her aura no less imposing than Feng Zhen's. She retorted, "If you want to use the family discipline to discipline your child, I won't object. But breaking his legs and whipping him to death is a little too much. He's your son. Is he not my son? Before you hit him, shouldn't you give me an explanation?" Feng Zhen's eyes widened in shock. He was secretly angry at the old housekeeper for being a busybody and dragging Wan Xiu into this. However, the trouble Feng Yi had caused couldn't be made public. He could only dismiss all the servants, point at Feng Yi and say, "Unfilial son, tell me what you've done wrong. Let your mother be the judge and ask for the family discipline to break your legs. Tell me if I've gone too far or if you deserve it." With that, Feng Zhen suppressed his anger and said to Wan Xiu, "It's not that I'm cruel. It's just that this unfilial son has nearly destroyed our family. If we don't teach him a lesson now, how can we protect him in the future?" Wan Xiu suddenly realized that she had misunderstood something. She turned her gaze to Feng Yi and said gently, "Rong Li, tell me what happened." Feng Yi obediently and briefly told him that she was going to give Jiang Qiji a gift. "Ji's secret letter." Wan Xiu asked, "Just a secret letter?" Feng Yi braced herself and said, "The content of the secret letter involves a lot of things." Feng Zhen furiously added insult to injury. "It's more than just a little involved. Could it be that you don't know how many people will view you as a thorn in their side once the things you've done are spread out? Who gave you the courage to get involved in something as big as taxes? At first, I thought that you were steady and mature. I didn't expect that. It would be better for you to be a profligate young master. If you raise a cripple, then so be it. At least you won't cause such a huge disaster." Wan Xiu was confused at first, but when she heard the word tax come out of Feng Zhen's mouth, she began to understand. "How big are the implications?" Feng Zhen laughed coldly. Any aristocratic family or poor family with some wealth would probably dream of burning this brat to ashes. Wan Xiu's heart went cold. She asked in a low voice, "Can the secret letter be recovered?" Feng Zhen sighed with a weary expression. The frivolity between his brows had disappeared long ago, leaving behind only deep worry. While he was angry, he was also worried about his brat. However, there was nothing he could do. "We can't recover it. It's too late. I'm afraid that the secret letter has already reached the master's hands." Feng Zhen was angry that his son had caused trouble, but he was even more worried that Feng Yi would be captured by his master to be sacrificed to the heavens. Even if the master didn't sacrifice this brat to the heavens, the victims, who had their cake touched by the master, would secretly seek revenge. Feng Yi said, "Father," Feng Zhen said angrily, "Stop shouting. I don't have an unfilial son like you. Now you remember that I'm your old man? Why didn't he think more when he caused trouble? Such a troublesome son should be beaten to death. If he and his wife worked hard, they might even be able to create a new account." Feng had been a little nervous at first, but when she saw Feng Zhen's attitude, she calmed down. "Father, your son thinks that things might not be as serious as you think." Feng Zhen laughed coldly. "I've eaten more salt than you've walked. You want to show off your intelligence in front of your father? You're still too young. Feng said, your son just feels that the master is different from the previous wise and virtuous rulers. Even if you flatter her now, she won't hear it, and she won't let you off. The master is indeed different, but she is also. At this point, Fengzhen felt a headache coming on and raised his hand to rub his forehead. Sentimental and nostalgic feudal vassals couldn't go far. His master maintained a frightening level of rationality 24 hours a day. If the heaven sacrificing ceremony could achieve the greatest benefits, she wouldn't be merciful. You're tuning in to the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.